Part 3, Chapter 14. The next few days Lewis spent drifting in and out of consciousness. Like floating in a saltwater bath, Lewis remembered what happened in Perth. He remembered jumping through the doorway and calling upon the contract house's assistance. He remembered landing on the floor of his apartment, hearing the collapse of the home behind him, still smelling a lingering scent of death. He almost remembered the stake of wood that pierced his chest and hitched a ride with him after the collapse. A moment later, the door to the contract house opened, Evangeline looking at him with horror, eyes flicking through the doorway he passed through. Lewis's consciousness wasn't in a place for him to follow her gaze, but he could only assume, for a moment, she saw Perth too. But her face told him she saw something else, something that passed as horrific recognition. "I've got you, Lewis," she whispered at last, the light scents of lavender and vanilla rolling off her body. "Noah will be okay too. You rest." Evangeline's voice shined through. It was softer than it had ever been, than he had assumed it could be, laced with kindness and a gentleness that he wasn't sure was natural to her. The lightness and the way her voice stitched his soul back to his body made him assume there was magic involved, but that was his last conscious thought. Sleep suffocated him in the nicest of ways, and when he awoke, it was raining. Lewis wasn't sure how magic was involved, but he knew that more. Time had passed in just a few hours, maybe even a day, or more. He guessed he'd been out to days from how his body felt a lingering level of soreness, like he had overexerted himself at the gym. It wasn't long enough, though, for him to forget what had happened. He supposed that was a kindness. The jarring fact of his hand being gone, cut off by his own choice and sacrifice, might have been too much of a mental shock to experience suddenly on awakening. The memory in the forefront of his mind's eye helped soften that blow, anchor him to the reality he had signed his soul over to. He was, indirectly, an agent of the British Museum, at least for now, but the consequences of his choice to fight the Dumonts would live on forever. Let it be so. The skin had healed over nicely, a confirmation that more time had passed than he assumed. The flap of flesh had been pulled tightly over the wound, and the stitched line was thin, barely noticeable. That didn't stop the wave of anguish crashing against his chest, making him feel tight, as if every nerve was hypersensitive. So he focused on other things. At first, he thought he was in a hospital, and in truth, in many ways, it was. Soft grays and peach-colored walls gave a muted, calm tone to the room. The sheets, albeit soft and of the highest quality, itched. The air, at the perfect temperature, felt moist, and his heart pumped in such a way that made the world seem like it was twisting upside down. But the walls flickered every so often, showing him what was under the surface of his apartment, as if the hospital facade was a layer placed over it to make him feel more comfortable. After all, as Noah had said, the contract house could provide him anything and everything he needed, including changing its shape. The door to the right opened slowly. With a twist of his sore neck that caused him to wince, Lewis came face to face with Noah. He looked better than in his last memory. His hair was still disheveled, and the tiredness lay heavy on his bones, making his skin look sullen and gaunt. Noah studied him. "You're awake," he said softly. "That's good. Means Chelsea is doing her job. Not that she wouldn't. She's great at healing." "You're rambling," Lewis muttered. Noah let out a low, thin chuckle, closing the door softly behind him. He walked slowly over, and from the corner of his eye, Lewis noticed he had a slight limp, favoring his left leg. Lewis wondered if that was a byproduct of the magic he had extended or something Lewis had never noticed before. He seemed fine, all things considered. Chelsea, the woman Noah had mentioned, might have been responsible for that too. "That I am." Lewis looked down at his hands, or, rather, his hand. "I'm not sure I want to be awake. The pain will go away. The physical, at least." Noah gestured to the bedside chair, not waiting for a confirmation, but taking the fact Lewis didn't say no as an invitation to sit. "The emotional, well, that's a little harder, but judging from what I've seen from you, you'll get through that." Lewis didn't have enough time to let the kindness of Noah's words sink in before Noah spoke again. "What do you remember?" At first, Lewis didn't answer, trying to parse on his own what was reality and what was fiction. But maybe Noah could help. They were, after all, in the loose of terms, partners, and partners helped each other, right? "I remember Australia," he said slowly. "I remember people dying because of the Dumont. Thank you, by the way. When I took the job as agent of the British Museum, I swore an oath to protect as many people as I could. That includes you, but," he said, Cutting Lewis off before he could counter him. Let me add some clarification for you. Yes, people died, but you saved more people than ended up dead. Lewis, you stayed behind and risked yourself to stop that painting. You purified it. I didn't do that. You did. Amy and her husband and all of her guests are still dead because of us. Yes, but also, maybe not. What's 100% true is that there are millions of people alive because of us. Because of you. He emphasized. I'm going to let you in on a little secret all agents learn within their first year of fieldwork. Being an agent isn't about saving as many lives as possible. I wish that was so, but it's about keeping the casualties as low as we can. Cursed antiquities do not care who they hurt. They were born from some of the darkest points of a person's life, imbued with resonance and on a loop that cannot be fixed, only eliminated. Our job is not retribution or rehabilitation or any of those words that you might hear in other careers. We are simply here to stop evil in its tracks and to ensure it doesn't hurt any more people by whatever means necessary. And that often means destruction. People will die because of that. Lewis frowned. It was what Noah had said at the cafe, too. And he'd hated hearing it from him and certainly disliked it being reinforced now. After all he'd seen, I refused to believe that we were able to stop the drowning. No one was hurt there. Why can't that be true for the other paintings? Because the drowning was a specific, unusual circumstance. We were able to isolate that in a room where no one except us might get hurt. 9 times out of 10, we are not given that luxury. I know that firsthand. You know that firsthand. Lewis studied Noah, concentrating on the words he said, feeling the emotion and the raw pulp of the truth behind them. He knew what this was about. At least, he assumed he did. There were people who were hurt in bringing the drowning to you. Lewis reminded Noah. You told me before to remind me how important and dangerous the painting was. Noah paused, and Lewis could tell he was deciding how to navigate the answer. They signed up for this, Noah said, his voice half an octave lower, almost as if he didn't believe it. When I say no one, I mean no one innocent. Do you not consider yourself innocent? Then, by that logic, anyone who works for the British Museum isn't. You're right, and so, no. I don't, Noah said without hesitation. Lewis didn't push it any further, not because he wasn't curious, but because something else, in the way Noah spoke about responsibility and guilt, caught his attention. You know, Lewis said quietly, every person who has lost someone, when they speak about death, speaks about it with a heaviness that you can't understand unless you've also experienced that loss. It was the point of no return, like he was stepping off a ledge between Noah and himself. Lewis, whoa. I wouldn't say they were friends, but perhaps, approaching it, this conversation, moving too quickly, could shatter that. Oh well, your sister. She died because of one of these paintings, didn't she? Noah let out a hitched sigh that Lewis knew. He wouldn't have heard if Noah hadn't been too exhausted to hide it. It was evident on his face and his mannerisms. A solemn heaviness weighed on him. Lewis could paint a picture of it, a representation of Noah's exhaustion, easily, of a man who had done so much in so little time that he was fraying at the edges, like a piece of leather, exposed to the weather for millennia. Maybe Noah had protected himself, shielded himself with every imaginable resource, magic, therapy, probably even drugs, alcohol, sex, and of course, the age-old compartmentalization and justification that what he was doing was worth more than his life or his sanity. But that only lasted for so long. That shell would keep the darkness inside for only so many batterings. Noah's expression stayed wounded only for a moment, as if he hadn't expected Lewis to put the pieces together, or he hadn't had someone ask him so directly about her. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, picking at the ends of his shirt sleeves. I'm sure you got it already, but she was an agent, he said. One of the best, actually significantly better than me. She's why I'm involved with the Macabre at all, because one of them took her. Yes, no, both. Noah clarified. She was the one responsible for them, assigned the task of looking for the paintings, looking for you, actually. In fact, she was the one who found you about 6 months ago, Noah continued, resting his elbows on his knees. She was the one charged with finding the drowning. Lewis frowned, remembering something Noah had said earlier. You told me you lost more than a dozen agents getting that painting. Noah nodded curtly. I never told you who those dozen were. My sister was one of them. My sister was a driven person. She never stopped once she decided to do something. This was an asset, but also a liability, because she was headstrong, Angry at the world, angry at our parents. Really. I see a lot of her in you. Thank you. That wasn't a compliment. It is what got her killed. Lewis paused, noticing, like the beginning of a storm, a shift in the air between them. Quietly, though, he said, I think it is. Noah looked up, a bit startled by Lewis's words, but Lewis didn't back down. Instead, he held the other man's gaze, hoping to convey only compassion and empathy and the idea that I'm right here. You don't have to push me away. Swallowing, Noah continued, Evangeline was nice enough to expend every resource to keep her safe. But Noah's voice trailed off as he closed his eyes. Lewis watched as he took in a slow and shuddering breath, holding it for 3 seconds and letting it out again. That doesn't matter, Noah said, standing. It's in the past. It clearly isn't, though, Lewis murmured, sitting up, making sure to straighten his back. You can say it. It doesn't matter. He repeated. How can you keep saying that? Because that's the problem here. Noah sighed. There are systems and rules, Lewis. Not just doing things on a whim because we want to. Lewis was confused. Was Noah talking about his sister? Or, this is about me touching the painting. It's about everything. I told you we were here to handle the Dumont, nothing else. And yet you jeopardized the whole mission instead of following orders. Now people are dead. You almost died. You lost your hand. You are not going to blame me for. Who else is there to blame? Noah asked pointedly. All those actions came from your choices, your desire to go off on your own, to rebuke orders. No one else but you. Me too, Lewis thought. It was the right thing to help, Lewis said, stealing his voice. And now we have a house of a dozen people dead and a wounded asset. Asset. That word rang true stronger than he thought it would. Lewis swallowed thickly, narrowing his eyes. Is that all I am to you? Noah didn't answer. Not at first. He smoothed his fingers over his pants and his shirt. Lewis supposed Noah wasn't sure what to say or whether he should apologize. Neither of those came, only the soft thump of his shoes against the floor and the hissing sound of the door opening once more. Let me know if you need anything, Noah finally said. When you're feeling better, Evangeline would like to speak with you some more. But Lewis didn't care about that. He cared about talking to the hurt young man that was walking out of the door. A lyric from an Otis Redding song looping in his head, and this loneliness won't leave me alone. That was Noah, and once more, it was Lewis too. Chapter 15. For the past 3.5 days in the hospital, Lewis had had a lot of time to do the one thing he never liked to do. Think. He was an artist, and self-reflection was part of his job, one of those skills that came highly recommended. Folding in and looking in on himself, exposing the pinkish inner, weakest, and most sensitive parts of himself to the world, was a natural expectation for how great art was made. But he could control that. He could decide how much of himself he wanted to reveal and in what manner he wanted to do it, manipulate his art, to reflect parts of himself that he wanted and obscure other parts he didn't. Clever artists knew how to do this well, to evoke the strongest of emotions while revealing the most hidden parts of themselves. Of course, Lewis suspected this was what held him back. Many of his mentors had told him that to create the greatest art, he'd have to feel it, to hurt. Lewis now had the opportunity to see what that meant, both mentally and physically, through his own experiences and others. He wasn't sure if that was what his professors meant, but if there was something Lewis now understood, it was pain. The agony from his missing right hand had mostly subsided. The healers at the British Museum were exceptional, to say the least, most of them using the highest caliber of magic and medical science to make the stitch look nearly invisible. The pain was good. It had a purpose. But the memory still lingered. Phantom pain, he supposed it was called. Amputees had it all the time, sometimes for years, sometimes forever. But this, Lewis imagined, was different. Whenever he thought about Perth, about Amy, about the stain, his hand ached. In the back of his mind, like it was happening across a crowded room, he could still hear the crumbling of the house. Sweat prickled on his brow, as if he was back in Australia all over again. Chelsea, a woman with fire engine red hair cut short, who reminded him of what an of Green Gables might look like if she were older and had grown up in the 21st century, had become his favorite healer. She was the one who spent the most time with him. She explained to him what she was doing, unlike the nurses and doctors who were cordial, yes, but treated him more like an inconvenience, a mistake rather than a person, which he really appreciated, as it seemed to ground the thoughts that were threatening to untether him. She was the one who came up with the idea for the runes on his stump. I'm sorry, what? Chelsea had spent her time helping him understand how resonance was used to heal. It was a unique type of magic that literally created new cells, from a mixture of the healer's resonance and the recipient's resonance, and acted in a constant loop. A version of dark magic made light, she had summarized. But this was different. I got approval from the director, she said, as if that justified her choice to essentially do experimental magic on him. Soft fingers grazed over where his hand should have been. He twitched, steeling himself from pulling away. Her fingers weren't touching the barely evident scar, but the faint runes that glowed along the midline of said scar. Louis squirmed just slightly at the faint feeling like a tickle through fabric. We can't give you your hand back, but these should allow you to function as if you have one. Louis was sure his face was conveying all Chelsea needed to know about how puzzled he was. Chelsea sighed, pulling her wild curls into a messy bun. All right, let me show you. Work with me here, she asked, walking to the small table across the room. She took the clipboard with Louis's biological data on it, showed it to him, and held it out an arm's length away. Grab it. Louis arched his brow, seeing he was going to get no further explanation. When he swung his legs over the bed, she shook her head. With your mind. It took him a moment to understand what she meant, but in her very Chelsea way she gave no more information. So, he tried it. He focused on the clipboard. His eyes narrowed slightly, and he imagined grabbing it, feeling the wood, willing the item to come to him and be in his hand. At first nothing happened, only the awkward silence of him acting like, frankly, an idiot. But then, with no discernible reason why the shift occurred, the clipboard twitched before yanking itself from Chelsea's grasp. Louis barely had enough time to shield himself with his good arm before the clipboard slammed into his wrist, sending a hiss of pain pulsing through his arm. We'll work on that, Chelsea said, picking up the clipboard from the floor where it lay rattling. If she was impressed, she didn't show it. But when he started beaming like again an idiot, she shook her head. Those runes allow you to do just that, lift things in relation to the weight your hand could carry before you lost it. As long as the item is in your line of sight, it can be lifted, willed, thrown, you name it. Louis wasn't completely sure he understood. Yes, he understood the basic principles of it. His thoughts had been extended beyond the normal reach of his arm. Simple, but what he wasn't sure of was why this gift had been given to him. Chelsea must again have read his question on his face. It was Noah's idea, if that helps, she said, smoothing the edges of the bed sheets. Well, not only Noah came up with the idea, technically, and he got the buy-in. He used his collateral to convince the director. Said if you get yourself in a situation like before, you should have some way to defend yourself. This allows that, for which he felt incredible gratitude. And yet, he couldn't help but also feel confused, because he still wasn't sure where he stood with Noah. All he did know was that if he and Noah discussed the failings of that mission and the magic that dripped from the Dumont paintings, they would eventually find their way back to talking about his mother. And he saw no point in rehashing that. Then Louis had to admit something that lurked in the corner of his mind that he refused to see fully. That blurred and disappeared when he focused too closely. He didn't know Noah that well. He only knew him as an agent of the British Museum, someone who had lost greatly and was willing to sacrifice greatly to right that wrong. But those weren't facts about a person. Those were the facts about someone who was barely living, who would crumble into nothingness once the mission was over and their purpose fulfilled, who didn't let anyone in because letting people in got them, and you hurt. Of course, he was sure that Noah did that on purpose, and he debated whether fighting through that rocky facade was worth it. It was something he had thought about far more than he wanted to admit, and he was tired of lying in his bed, rehashing those thoughts over and over. So, instead, he tried to stand once more, only for the room to reel. Chelsea rushed to his side. Careful, Chelsea said softly, grabbing his left hand with hers, holding him tightly. She was stronger than she looked, a skinny little thing much like the models he saw on TV. She looked naturally thin, almost bird-like, with sharp features and wide eyes. But in no way was she delicate. Too, she was warm in a way that Louis didn't know was possible. At first, he thought it was magic, some type of aura that she placed on the room, or an effect that the hospital created to make him feel better. Perhaps more logically, however, Louis just needed company. He needed somebody in his corner who wasn't wanting anything from him, who wanted only the best for him. He hadn't felt that in a while. Look at you, Chelsea said. I have to admit I'm pretty proud of my work here. You should be. Stitch me back together. Chelsea let out a dismissive scoff and waved her hand. You did the hardest part. Sure, getting rid of a curse is one thing, but you wanted to get better. And look, she said, raising his right arm where his right hand should be. It looks good. It's going to take a bit of getting used to, Lewis said, not having a hand. Once again, Chelsea's eyes softened. I did my best, she said, but the way that you lost it was magic I had never seen before. Me neither, he said with a wry smile, and she almost looked amused. At least it was something. Lewis raised his remaining hand and shook his head. It was strange, but he had already come to terms with what he had lost, at least for now. He was sure the guilt of what happened in Perth would come crashing over him, like a tsunami every now and then. Of course, the feeling of loss eventually would subside. Chelsea had found a way to give him something else in the meantime. The spell that made his arm an extension of his mind would be useful. There was no doubt about it. If this was the price he had to pay for one less demon on the planet, so be it. The stain was purified one more on the list stand that meant the world was now a little bit better. People were saved because of him. Moreover, for the first time, he felt as if his life had meaning, that he had done something good. For now, that was enough. Okay, this time I want to see if you can stand up on your own, she said gently, placing her hands under his armpits to assist. Once he was stable, she took a step back, holding her thumb and pointer finger of each hand in an L-shaped pattern, connecting them to make a rectangle. With one eye open, she looked through the space, her eye of vibrant colors shifting from green to blue, as if filters had been put in front of it. Slowly, she moved her hand down and then up. There's nothing wrong with you, she finally said. Your wounds are healed, at least the physical ones, and I think you're good to go. I can let Evangeline know, and you should be back in the field in a few days, assuming you still want to be back in the field. It was a good question, a question he was sure Noah would be asking him, one he should probably be asking himself. He supposed, though, it wasn't the right question. Whether he wanted to or not, it didn't matter if the woman on high decided what he had done was too reckless. So, the question was whether Evangeline would let him back in the field. But it brought up an even more reasonable thought, one Lewis chastised himself for not considering earlier. Perhaps Evangeline didn't care about his well-being. She only cared about the success of finding and neutralizing the Dumonts, which would make such a question moot. She would do whatever it took, strip the flesh and bone away of any living person, including himself, if it meant that the paintings were found. Nothing mattered, not who she had to rent along the way, what secrets she had to keep or lies she had to tell. But that didn't sit right either. Evangeline had said that there was no way to bring his mother back, at least not with the Dumonts, and he accepted that. But perhaps there was some way else. Perhaps there was magic here or somewhere in the world that could do it. Why couldn't he invoke that power, then? And if the Dumonts were strong enough to be a threat to a great empire, perhaps, together, the collective magic in them would be powerful enough to bring his mother back. And, perhaps, Evangeline didn't want him to know that. Yes, that felt right. Something about that conclusion clicked and locked into place, some perception and intuition. Slowly, his eyes refocused, seeing Chelsea looking at him with a worried expression. Would you go back in the field if you were me? Chelsea bit her bottom lip. The balance between the spilling of blood and not was a fine line, one Lewis assumed she balanced often. The nervous tick seemed reflexive for her. I joined the British Museum because Ireland doesn't have an organization as powerful or as effective as England's. Trinity College has a department that focuses on the preservation of resonance, researching how to keep it balanced and creating documents about how our use of magic is tearing the carefully balanced fabric apart, like climate change and the ozone layer. Precisely, she said. But that's not the same as being in the action. But and apologies for saying this, you're a healer. You're not in the action like Noah and other agents. You're right. But I do keep the agents alive. I make sure agents like you can go back into the field. That's enough action for me. After all, I'm doing something even more important than those stuffy agents. Learning how to defy death, to be someone who can help those who are fighting the good fight a little longer. That's my calling. Yours is the field. But before you can go off and return, you need your rest. Lewis was flattered by Chelsea's confidence, even if it wasn't fully earned. Noah had been very clear, just days before, that he had messed up. And like most things in life, time provided clarity. Perhaps he had acted out of turn, too brazen and cocky in believing that he could make a difference greater than the British Museum had. Despite what he was sure others would say, he felt like he'd fail. He couldn't do that again. He couldn't accept, like Noah had, that some number of lives lost were okay. There had to be a way to prevent that, to stay one step ahead. And then it clicked. "Chelsea," he said, "do you have a pen?" Lewis raised his hand. "I want to draw something. That's always calmed me." She patted herself down comically before pulling out a ballpoint. "Will this do?" Lewis nodded. As Chelsea took a step forward, he shook his head and focused on the pen in her hand. It took a moment for it to twitch before it hovered, shakily, pulling itself slowly toward Lewis. Each second, it seemed like the grip he had on it was going to break, but the pen continued to move by itself before settling in his lap. Chelsea grinned, proud. "See? I told you. I'll get better at it," Lewis said. "I have no doubt." Chelsea closed the door behind her as she left. But right now, Lewis didn't care about getting better. He only cared about one thing: knowledge. The logic he was using to get from point A to point B might be faulty, but he had to try. He remembered what he read in one of the books days before. In the contract house, blood was the purest form of resonance, a way to tap into the richest vein of it. If he was connected to Edgar through bloodlines, maybe he could use his blood as a stronger conduit to find the next painting, force a fugue state, and get one step ahead of Evangeline. Lewis knew what was coming in the next few days. The ominous Evangeline would like to speak with you could mean he was being dismissed, like when a principal wants to pull you into their office, or a boss puts a 9:00 meeting with HR on the calendar on a Friday. But unlike those situations, there was a sliver through the closing walls he could navigate to salvation. If he was smart and cunning enough, if he proved his usefulness, if he had something they couldn't get, then that might change. That would change. It would have to. Will it work? He questioned as he reached over, grabbing a set of napkins to use as his canvas. He had no idea, but from what he read and understood about resonance and magic, it would. Focus on the idea of the painting using his blood, mixed with the ink and paint. Lewis grabbed the pen with his left hand, wrapping his fingers around it like claws. It took a few tries, much like chopping off his hand, but eventually the sharp, warm feeling of the tip of the pen stabbing into his right forearm flooded his body. He hissed, digging the pen into his vein like into an inkwell, saturating the tip in his blood as much as he could. Pulling his shaking hand back, he studied the pen, how his blood and the ink mixed to make it a darker red hue, almost like rust, how the mixture dripped onto the napkins. Drop after drop, the ink and blood splattered like a flower blooming and its petals yawning open. Before he could stab himself again, Lewis felt his mind begin to drift away. Comfort and ambivalence fell over him as whatever magic inside him that allowed him to paint the future took over. And then there was silence. Lewis couldn't be certain how long the silence and stillness lasted until he opened his eyes and noticed the warm purples, yellows, and oranges of the sunset were shining through the window. His body felt sore, his right forearm peppered with over a dozen small holes, his blanket stained with sprinkles of blood. But the images on the napkins, 5 of them laid out like a puzzle, were done. An ornate house with rolling hills. The perspective was clearly from inside of a home looking outward, and it took Lewis a moment to realize he recognized exactly what it was. Abernathy. He spoke to the home. "Call Evangeline and Noah. Tell them I know where the next painting is." Chapter 16. When Evangeline and Noah arrived with a flurry and fluster as if they had been summoned with time now on their side, Lewis realized he wasn't exactly sure how he was going to handle this conversation. Noah was, for lack of a better word, pissed at him, according to the scowl on his face, which was fair, considering all he had done, and Evangeline wasn't exactly interested in supporting him. But Lewis knew the truth. There was a limited amount of time on his side. Noah had said that much between the lines. The way he'd acted in Perth had used up all their goodwill, and now he had to find a way to balance the scales. As Evangeline entered ahead of Noah, her eyes scanned the room, noticing the bloodstains on the blanket, her eyes drifting back to Lewis. "You shouldn't have done that," she said, her voice chastising and sharp. "Touch the painting or stab myself." "Because I agree. Don't be glib," she snapped, voice icy and cold. "Magic isn't a toy for you to play house with." He opened his mouth to retort, to justify his choices, but Evangeline raised her hand. From the corner of his eye, he saw that Chelsea had reappeared, fiddling with the IV attached to his right arm within his biceps, flowing into his vein. Evangeline waited in silence until Chelsea left the room. "What you two did was beyond stupid," Evangeline said firmly. He did what he had to do to protect me, Lewis replied, his voice careful. He almost alerted a whole city block and a whole country to magic and put unnecessary eyes on us, Evangeline sharply concluded. Be that as it may, she continued, gesturing a wide dismissal with a wave of her hand. What's done is done. You called us here for. I know where the next Dumont is, Lewis said firmly. Noah frowned, a momentary sign of emotion that Evangeline didn't share. The stillness on her face was unnerving, but Lewis didn't falter. So the contract house told us. What makes you think we don't know already, do you? Evangeline didn't answer, but simply gestured with her hand once more. Humor me. Lewis shook his head. No, not this time. Because if you knew where the next painting was, you wouldn't have come. I know I'm not on your good side right now. You caused the deaths of a dozen people and the collapse of a home. Lewis continued, swallowing past that. Which means you need me to tell you where the next one is so that doesn't happen again. Am I warm? Evangeline fell silent. That was all he needed to confirm it. So, it's simple, Lewis said. I'll guide you to where the painting is, or I could just pull the information out of you, Evangeline reminded him, taking a step forward. Your mind is fragile, more so than most. It wouldn't be that hard, except you might risk damaging my gift while you're in there, helping no one. When all you have to do instead is agree to this exchange, you'll get what you want. Lewis, just for a moment, looked at Noah. He didn't expect his support, not now, and the way his jaw was set, steely and firm, confirmed Lewis was on his own. But Noah didn't speak out against him. That was something. Okay, Evangeline finally said. Share. Lewis hesitated, studying her. How do I know? I'm a woman of my word, Lewis, she said, frustrated. And lying too. You isn't worth my time when there are paintings out there that can do what was just done in Perth. Lying to you helps me not. That was enough for Lewis, for now. Reaching under the blanket, he pulled the 5 napkins out and laid them in a pattern, showing the expansive countryside landscape and the home. I didn't recognize it at first, but I took an art history class that focused on non-Western paintings. He explained, the architecture and the landscape aren't exact, but they are reminiscent of Hiroshi Yoshida, 19th century painter known for his work in Japan, but specifically in Osaka. Shit, she muttered. Isn't that good news? Lewis asked. Now we know where the next painting is. I mean, Osaka's big, but it's a start. Big doesn't quite cover it, Noah replied. 3 million people live there, give or take a couple of 100,000. But even that's not the point, he said, looking at Lewis. Shit is because Japan is not part of the connected countries. He fell silent there, pausing as if he wasn't supposed to continue with what he was saying. Evangeline shrugged. We're this far anyway. We might as well give him the rest. Noah nodded, turning his gaze to Lewis. More. We don't have the best relationship with Japan. That's an understatement, Evangeline said. I'm sure that you, despite your American education, understand that England has a tense relationship with some other countries historically. Tense was a choice word, Lewis thought. He knew the way England had raped and pillaged nations throughout the world, throughout history. He wasn't here to cast judgment about that, especially considering he was American, but he understood Japan's stance. In fact, he applauded any country that was willing to puff out their chest against England. Except, right now, that sense of justice was a hindrance to everything he, Noah, and Evangeline wanted to accomplish. Let me guess, Lewis said. You're not allowed there. Not allowed there is. Evangeline paused. No, that's about right. We don't have a good relationship with Japan for many reasons going back hundreds of years. Japanese agents in their own magical division and our agents for the British Museum don't see eye to eye. We are an extension of the royal court here. So even though we function as an independent agency, we still take advisement and follow the edicts of the crown, which don't always agree with what the rest of the world believes we should do when it comes to magical artifacts or magic in general. That was an interesting way to answer the question, Lewis thought. But reading between the lines, the elegant ridges, and the pomp and circumstance, what Evangeline was basically saying was that England and Japan differed on something key and integral to their souls, how to use magic. So, what you're saying is if we go into Japan to try and get this piece, there's a chance it could cause an international incident. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, one that neither Noah nor Evangeline countered. Well, we certainly can't go in their weapons blazing, Evangeline said. The way that she said those words made it sound as if she thought that's what the American would think they should do, as if some cowboy jingoism was his only mo. Lewis didn't waste his breath dispelling the notion. It's much more delicate than that, particularly because we don't know if the Japanese already have it in their possession. Noah replied, as you said, Osaka's a big city, and if the Japanese already have it, it's going to be even harder to get. They're not going to hand it over willingly, even if we do explain our rationale, which begs the question of whether they're using it. Unfortunately, too, your little blood painting doesn't tell us what that Dumont could do. Lewis conceded that. But did it matter? All he could think about was what the stain did to Amy, her husband, and their friends did to him. If this painting was anywhere as powerful as that one, a shiver of disgust went down his spine. It wasn't that he thought the Japanese would use it for nefarious reasons, no more than any other country would, but he understood power, and he understood how it corrupted. The rot started from the top, and depending on who owned the painting, at best it could be corrupting only them. At worst, it could lead to global corruption. There's something else to consider, Lewis said slowly, thinking through his own words. When I touched the stain, when you acted against orders, Evangeline muttered, sure, let's go with that. I felt something. Something? Lewis held his remaining hand up, looking at the palm and clenching it, like resistance. Like the painting was pushing back against me. I felt it too, no added. There was a malignant force in the house, a sourness in the air. It made Lewis's nose bleed. It was magic, obviously, she said. No, this was different. Like, reactive. He turned to Lewis. You're saying you felt it in the painting too? Lewis nodded. When I dove in, it felt thicker. Like it was fighting me. Lewis paused. It might sound crazy, but nothing is crazy when it comes to magic, Lewis, Evangeline said. He couldn't tell if there was a sense of compassion or annoyance in her voice. It felt like the painting knew I was there. Like, when we neutralized the drowning, we tripped an alarm or something. It feels as if the Macabre know we're hunting them, that they know we're trying to destroy them and are fighting back. Yes, these paintings were a blight, and the only answer to him, at least, was to eradicate that contagion from the face of the earth. Of course, if someone had told him months, even weeks, ago that one item could shift the axis of the world, especially one piece of art, he would have laughed at them. But knowing what a Dumont could do now, all he could think about was that there had to be a way for them to get the painting, to destroy it. If you're correct, that would be reason to break the treaty, Noah said, tilting his gaze to Evangeline, asking for silent permission. Your actions would have global ramifications that neither of you, nor, frankly, I, could understand, Evangeline said, shaking her head. We're not going to ruin an already tightly wound relationship for an opinion or a conjecture, except you're forgetting what isn't conjecture, Lewis said a moment later, and that is, that I'm not British. Both Evangeline and Noah glanced at him. There was a gap, an opening he could slip through and plead his case, and he was damn well going to take it. Sure, I'm working on behalf of you two, but I'm not part of the British Museum. I don't belong to your country. There are no issues with me going, and at least talking to them. You still belong to a superpower, she reminded him. You think that the British are the only ones that the Japanese have a problem with? In the field of magic, in the most mundane sense, America is still a corrupt capitalist nation. Fold in your magical history, not only inside of your country, but outside, and the poison runs deeper than the surface. Not to mention certain nuclear incidents. How she was able to make an offhand reference out of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Lewis wasn't sure, but he wondered if that sort of attitude had anything to do with why the Japanese hated the British as well. They're not going to be any happier to see you than they are us. One could argue less happy, but I'm not working on behalf of my government either. I'm just a guy from Baltimore. I'm thinking, Noah interrupted. You're thinking that if you lay all our cards out on the table, you might be able to convince them to hand it over. That you're just a guy from Baltimore. No, Lewis said, gritting his teeth. I'm not thinking that. I don't think it's going to be that easy, but if we put our heads together, I'm sure we can find common ground to offer them. The Japanese have an agency like the British do, as do the Americans, as part of your CIA, Evangeline said as if that was some slight against him. Personally, Lewis said, which means they know the Dumonts like you do. They understand the danger, and I'm sure over the years they might have crossed paths with one. This one, if we're lucky, if they can understand, like you, how dangerous these items are and can understand that I can help destroy them, we can at least put aside our differences for that. Noah sighed. Your egalitarian view of the world is admirable, but we don't have the time to explain hundreds of years of geopolitical tension to you. Please condescend to me more, Lewis said. But Noah wasn't fazed by Lewis's anger. On the surface that would work, but the intersection and the Cold War of magic are far different than anything you've learned about in your history classes. It's more complicated and intricate than surface-level warfare. Magic is a whole other beast, and our departments are not allies. And whose fault is that? Lewis said. He knew he probably shouldn't, but he continued anyway. No matter what you think of my knowledge of history, politics, or magic, they are interconnected. What you call surface-level geopolitics of the mundane world and the magical world are not two separate entities. They're not oil and water. Both play off each other, even if I don't know the specifics. And just as I might not know the specifics of why you all don't play nice together, it's obvious you are as much to blame, if not more, than the Japanese. He knew he was wading into dangerous territory, but he had nothing to lose. At worst, he assumed that they would decide he wasn't a good enough pseudo-agent for this mission, but he did understand that he had something that they needed, and from that there was power in his voice. If you see another option, I'm open to it. I'm not, but I am an independent agent here. I'm our best chance that the Japanese will see that I am not a threat to them, and we can neutralize this painting and get out of there based on absolutely no knowledge of the Japanese and their thoughts on the matter. It helps everyone. It helps me by making me feel useful and special again. And what if the Japanese want to use you and the gift that the Dumont provides for their own nefarious reasons? Evangeline asked. Why do you assume that will be their first idea? Lewis countered. Evangeline pursed her lips into a thin line. Because I've been playing the geopolitical game longer than you've been alive, young man. Lewis could tell they were approaching a stalemate. I'm just saying, let me go on my own, and we can. Absolutely not, she interrupted. I saw what happened in Australia. Even if I didn't, she gestured to his arm. A missing hand, a dozen people dead, a house collapsed. That wasn't his fault, Noah said. No, it wasn't. It was mine for letting you to go. Lewis, you have a unique gift that we can use, yes. But it's not useful in the field. You can't be serious, he said. I purified the painting. Oh, no, I'm very serious. You purified it, yes, but without considering the consequences. So, once you are better, Noah will ensure you stay here until you are needed. We will bring you to the Dumont. Supervised or bring it here if possible, and you will do what has to be done and then wait until we find the next one. This isn't a debate. This is what is happening, Evangeline said, turning toward the door. It is my responsibility to find these paintings. It is also my job to keep you safe. Keeping you here helps with both. I'm not just going to sit here, twiddling my thumbs, waiting for you to call on me, considering you have only one hand. I don't think that will be possible. Anyway, she said without hesitation, heading to the door. We will call on you as we need you. Noah, come with me, please. We need to debrief with the others about how best to handle Japan. You know someone there, do you not? Noah's eyes locked on Lewis. Lewis did his best, silently, to plead for him to say something, anything. But he knew where Noah's loyalty lay. He had made that clear. I do. I'll get on that right away, he muttered, turning on his heels and closing the door, leaving Lewis to his thoughts, the throbbing wound of his stump, which he was sure Chelsea would be in within moments to heal, and the heavy feeling of failure weighing on his chest. Chapter 17. A few days after Evangeline's edict, Noah returned to speak his own order. You need fresh air, he said, opening the closet, examining the clothes in there. Staying inside all day isn't good. Magic can't replace vitamin D. Lewis stood there, hesitant about whether he could or even should trust him. Noah had made it very clear early on where his loyalties lay, especially after Lewis's choice to go against his authority in Perth. But if Noah knew, recognized, or remembered, he didn't convey any of that in his actions. Picking out a yellow t-shirt and a pair of jeans, he placed them on the bed next to Lewis. These would look good on you. If anything, it reminded Lewis of someone who didn't know how to form an apology doing their best to do so. He could push back, and perhaps he should, but honestly, he was tired, and his mother always said, you got more with honey than with vinegar. And in this uncertain world, Lewis needed an ally. He knew that much. I'll wait outside, Noah muttered, leaving before Lewis could reply. Sighing, standing by himself, Lewis took a moment to slip on the clothes. Should I trust him? He asked the house. He expected no reply, but the walls shuddered, the bookcase trembling as, once again, A book fell. Lewis, this time, reacting quickly, extending his right arm and willing the book to stop before it hit the ground. It halted 6 or so inches before it collided with the floor, before, trepidatiously, it floated toward him. Lewis smiled, taking the book in his left hand, turning it over. Magic, the mind, the body, how mentality and fortitude are half the battle in spellcasting, he said out loud. So, you have a sense of humor. Good to know. But he made a mental note, placed it on the counter, and stepped outside. Sure enough, leaning against the wall, was Noah, sole of his boot pressed against the wall. Ready? Lewis nodded, following him down the street as they walked. I'm glad you're feeling better, Noah said moments later, about a block down the street. Is that because you don't want to lose anyone on your watch? It was an unfair accusation, and Lewis knew it before the words left his mouth. Sorry, Noah raised his hand in a dismissing way. No, I deserve that, he said. Although Noah didn't explain why he deserved such a jab, Lewis had a few ideas. To start, one thing he learned about Noah thus far was that he cared a lot about other people. Even if he didn't want to admit it, he felt responsible, like their fates were intertwined. Lewis wasn't a psychologist, but he assumed this tendency had something to do with the death of Noah's sister. But then, again, agents of the British Museum were like law enforcement officers, except they were magical. There was a certain type of person who took a job like that, and though he hadn't seen that side of Noah yet that would cause Lewis to take a step back and protect himself, he knew it existed. I didn't expect you to say anything, Lewis said as they continued to walk together. In front of Evangeline. I should have. A beat. You were right, you know, about Japan. Well, that was a turn Lewis didn't expect. He glanced over at Noah. He looked straight ahead as if he were afraid that if he turned to look at Lewis, he would have to admit something that he didn't want to admit to himself. But that didn't stop Noah from talking. We should go, he said. Try and figure this mess out. Assuming the Japanese won't help us is projecting on our part, holding on to some age-old grudge and keeping us from even attempting to collaborate. It's keeping us siloed, limiting us. Lewis's shoulders relaxed half an inch. He had been thinking about what Evangeline had said, and it hadn't sat well with him, not simply because the view was, as Noah said, so limiting, but because it was a great insight into how the British Museum viewed other people around them. It was binary. There was no room for gray, which surprised him, considering that magic itself was not a black and white thing. It wasn't just zeros and ones. It was creativity. It was emotion. It was hope. It was dreams, all manifested into a physical force. How could someone who used something like that, something so powerful, not see that the world, which was made up of magic, was just as complex as the spells they cast? Simple. They chose not to because it didn't suit their goals. And that was a dangerous thing. You know you'd be going against your boss, correct? Lewis asked. If you and I go to Japan, I want to make sure you fully process what that means. Noah shrugged. No words followed. That's not encouraging, Lewis muttered. The director is going to find another way to get to this Dumont you found, and I have every confidence she will find it and obtain it. But it will take time, and that's not something we have. Lewis quirked his brow. You're not telling me everything. Noah nodded. We've been tracking movement of artifacts, of hedge, groups of magicians. The knowledge of the macabre to some is a legend, to others a myth not worth spending mental energy on, and to others a reality. Exactly. And too many of those who looked closely, they've noticed the pattern. In London, in Perth. Noah fell silent for a moment. There was someone there, with us, outside the house when it collapsed. I believe they were one of those hedge magicians. I didn't see anyone on the street, neither did I. But I felt them. For a moment when the house collapsed, I thought it was the foundation breaking. But I think they did it. Collapsed the house on us. I'm not sure for what purpose, but it stands to reason if they were there, they knew about the macabre too, and if one person does, more people do. Did you bring it up with Evangeline? I did, and she told me not to worry about it, which, as I'm sure you can guess, made me worried. Lewis silently agreed. Noah had reason to be worried, and it only prickled his senses about Evangeline even more. She should care about something like that, be concerned with the situation at large. Shouldn't she be interested in collecting as much information as she could muster about her opponents, let alone amassing as strong a force against them as possible? As they crossed the street, Lewis, turning his body to the right to avoid a group of tourists chattering rapidly and oblivious to those around them, smiled. They were finishing one another's sentences, giggling as they did so. A connection like that, especially among a group of people like-minded and in sync, was rare. He himself never had that with a person, never was so much in sync with another that. Lewis paused, stopping in the middle of the street. It took Noah half a dozen steps to realize he was no longer beside him. Lewis saw confusion on Noah's face, then curiosity, as he walked back to gently grab Lewis's shoulder and pull him out of the street. "Where did you go? You mentioned you felt the person's presence, right?" Noah nodded. "Pretty easy. Cloaking yourself is a basic technique, but it's harder to cloak yourself while using other magic, and everything has a signature, right? Even people without magic?" "That's true. What are you getting at?" Lewis smiled. "I have an idea," he said, extending his hand to Noah. "Trust me." Noah didn't hesitate long enough for Lewis to read into it. A playful, almost boyish smile spread over his features, as if this was the first time in a long while he had been excited. "The contract house can take us any way through any door, right?" "Yes, that's right." "Or anything that resembles a door?" Lewis asked, walking quickly down the street. "Correct again, but the more questions you ask, the more hesitant I am too." Lewis didn't let him finish, pausing for half a moment in front of a coffee shop's door. He looked left and right, waiting for the street to be relatively empty before using his magic hand to turn the knob. He closed his eyes. "Abernathy, take us to the hospital." His words weren't an order, but a request spoken lightly and evenly. At first, nothing happened, no sounds, no shifting of stone, no recognition that the contract house had even acknowledged what he'd said. But a moment later, the world around him spun and a gust of wind blew out as Lewis opened his eyes to acknowledge the house's response. He heard a whisper, so faint he almost mistook it for a trick of his mind from a whistling breeze. "As you wish." Lewis knew that when he opened the door, the house would take him exactly where he wanted to be. He inhaled deeply and exhaled, his breath surprisingly shakier than he thought it would be. "You know," Noah said, "in the past fortnight, you've dispelled the paintings, used magic twice, and survived an attack on your life. You're shaping up to be a talented agent. I've also broken protocol by entering the stain, lost a hand, had an encounter with a strange magician, and am now breaking my confinement." Not exactly agent material, Lewis thought. Lewis took in the space around them, the hospital from Edgar's painting, completely abandoned and cold, like forgotten stone. "This place hasn't been used in years," Noah muttered, glancing around, letting his fingers drag against the walls of peeling paint and rust. With a flick of his fingers and a counterclockwise pattern with his left hand and a clockwise one with his right, Noah closed his eyes and inhaled. He continued the opposing motion with each hand slowly, reminding Lewis of two clock hands moving in opposite directions. "It was last occupied 45 years ago," Noah continued, eyes still closed. "Shut down because of a scandal. Hasn't been used since, which is strange. England wouldn't usually let a building like this stay abandoned. It's prime real estate, unless something is keeping others from seeing it or acting against it," Lewis suggested. Noah smiled. "Exactly. It's keeping a secret, and the magic is protecting it. From the outside, I imagine someone might comment on why this abandoned building is still standing here, but forget about it a moment later. I might have even passed it several dozen times. So, I doubt we'll find any records here. That would be too easy," Lewis concluded, walking down the hallway. His steps felt familiar, and it took him only about a dozen to realize the contract house had dropped him off exactly in the same hallway that the painting had taken him. He supposed that made sense. The house had no idea how to extrapolate the layout of the rest of the hospital, given that Lewis never saw it. From the window halfway down the hall, he could see London like he had before. New skyscrapers and buildings had been erected over the past 150 years, but the view was otherwise still the same. "No, we won't," Noah said, opening his eyes. "But that doesn't mean the trip is a waste." Lewis turned to face Noah, and what he saw puzzled him. Noah's brow was scrunched, not from frustration and anger. It was the look of someone trying to put together a puzzle that was missing a piece. "Do you sense it?" Noah asked. "I smell mold and iron." Noah shook his head. "No. Focus. Feel it." Lewis pulled at the threads of resonance Noah was hoping he would be able to detect. But it had become clear to him over the past few days that besides his own unique magic ability that had come from his ancestor, pulling at the strings of resonance to manipulate the world at large didn't come naturally to him. It made him wonder if it would come to him at all. Was manipulation of resonance something someone could learn? Or did there have to be a drop of innate talent to cultivate into something impressive? Thankfully, Noah didn't push the subject. You know what a paradox is, correct? Two things existing in the same space that shouldn't. Lewis said without hesitation. The cornerstone of a lot of science fiction movies, TV shows, and books. Someone once said that magic is science that hasn't been understood yet. I'm sure you're seeing that scientific principles help us understand resonance. They're one and the same, two different sides of the same coin. He looked to Lewis, who urged him on, unable to dismiss how the excitement in Noah's eyes made him excited. Paradoxes do exist, Noah said. Two things can't and shouldn't exist in the same space. It's not that the world will collapse on itself, as TV shows like you to think. It's as if they're like the same magnetic poles, unable to touch no matter how hard they try. Noah nodded. It's nearly impossible for something to exist in the same space as something else. Not impossible in that you can't be there, but the universe will rewrite itself to prevent that from happening again. It's not that we can't use resonance to travel back in time and interfere with ourselves. It's that no matter how hard we try, the universe will make it so we never get there in time. Our spell backfires, or something comes up that will prevent us from being there by a second or two. The universe is itself a living, thinking, breathing entity, and it reacts accordingly, which is all fascinating, Noah, Lewis said. But what does that have to do with this? It has everything to do with this, Noah replied quickly, bridging the gap between them, excitement crackling in his voice. Originally, we thought that when you went into a painting, you went into a pocket universe. You relived a memory, but I can feel the crackle of your previous self here. Every person has a signature, Lewis. I feel that same signature here, twice. That's impossible. I've never been to this hospital before, but you have, Noah argued. When you went into the stain, I don't think you're going into a memory when you travel into a painting. I think you're actually going back in time. It must have been clear on Lewis's face that he didn't completely understand what Noah was talking about. Noah was quick to explain further. Pocket universes exist because of memories. They're common. We can create them by taking memories out of someone's mind and housing them in something. It's the same principle of a Dumont, except the Dumonts are made of negative emotions, not memories. It's why we assume the former. But I believe your connection with Edgar is allowing you to use these paintings, conduits of his soul that he put into these paintings when he created them, to travel to the inciting incident that created the painting. Lewis hesitated. It feels more like being inside a painting, but Noah shook his head. The painting is the tunnel that takes you to the moment. It connects the here to the then, a moment in time captured from emotion and a throughway to that incident. In a sense, it's the same principle as the contract house latching onto a memory and using it as an express lane to a specific location. Exactly, Noah replied, proud. Except you're traveling through time because you and Edgar share a bloodline. That doesn't change. It changes everything. If you can travel into the past via the paintings, it's reasonable to assume that you can edit the past. Perhaps leave a marker for yourself to help us find a Dumont or change the past in other ways. It means things are more complicated. If everyone with an interest in the Dumonts who knows of you is operating off the principle of you and a pocket memory, I'm positive they would be far more interested in finding you if they knew you could travel into the past. Do you think this would make Evangeline more receptive to me helping out? Noah nodded. And also put more of a target on your back. Both are. Good. Means you're more of a liability and an asset. And Evangeline loves those. It means we have to find the other paintings, even if that means bending the rules a bit. Noah turned toward the door from which they had come, taking long, hurried strides. A complex string of hand motions laced through his fingers, motions that Lewis recognized from Evangeline's office. So, we're really doing this? Lewis asked, keeping up with him. Unless you don't want to and want to wait for Evangeline to call upon you. Lewis shook his head, placing his hand on Noah's shoulder. You might get fired for this. My mother would love that. He smiled. I don't come home nearly enough. Chapter 18. In the short span of less than 2 weeks, Lewis had traveled farther than he ever thought he would, both figuratively and, now, literally. From London to Perth and now Osaka, he wondered if this was what it meant to be an agent of the British Museum. He could understand why Noah did this job. The city was far more bustling than Perth was, or even London. Lewis noticed that when they passed from the hospital into the Japanese city, for a flicker of a moment, they stepped through the contract house. It apparently acted like an in-between space, a piece of fabric that stitched other pieces together. It disoriented him enough that when he stepped down thousands of miles away, He was surprised and thrown off balance. Noah was kind enough to gently take his arm and steady him. An older Japanese woman glanced at him, although he didn't see disdain in her eyes, only curiosity. That feeling was confirmed when her eyes flickered down to his missing hand and back up to his gaze before she quickly shuffled away. Louis knew that look well. It was the look of someone who hadn't seen a black person before, but was too polite to say it directly to his face. It was also the look of someone who tried to avoid looking like they were staring at his missing hand. To her, Louis was a passing moment, perhaps something that she would talk about with her friends or something that she would completely forget. As Louis scanned the streets of Osaka, listening to the bustle of new words and expressions he couldn't understand, all he could wonder was which one of these people had a connection to the Dumont. For a brief moment, the weight of his own choices pressed down on him. What if he was wrong? What if his drawings weren't as accurate as he thought they would be, and he led Noah on a wild goose chase? Evangeline wouldn't take kindly to that, and the fragile alliance Noah and he had would shatter. Louis sighed, attempting for a moment to use his remaining hand to scratch at an itch on his cheek. Another harsh reminder of something he would have to get used to. "I don't suppose you have a spell that will translate everyone for us?" Louis asked, looking at Noah. At first, there was no response. It was as if Noah didn't hear him. His eyes narrowed as he gazed slowly around the busy street. Noah's head moved like a scanner, taking in every inch of the city block and processing it, like he was looking for something and wanted to make sure he didn't miss it, as if whatever glamour or sleight of hand used to hide it wouldn't escape his gaze. "Noah," Louis repeated. "The director is going to send people after us, you know," he muttered, shoving his hands into his pockets. "The moment she realizes we're not in London anymore." "I assume so." Louis paused, clarifying, "I assumed you had prepared for that." "Yes, no." Noah sighed. "Not really. This isn't." The words fell silent, but Louis knew what he was trying to say. "Isn't you? Isn't me?" Noah concluded. "But I do know one thing. There is a more pressing problem at hand than not having a plan." Louis quirked his brow. "I imagine we have one, maybe 2 minutes before they find us," Noah said. "Every country, America, England, and Japan included, has casters whose sole job it is to watch and monitor who enters and leaves the country, especially those with magical signatures. They are experts at deciphering how refined and sharp a person's resonance is and can accurately pinpoint not only their location but skill level. I expect you had no idea you were being followed the moment you arrived in London." Louis thought he should feel a certain way about that, like a pinprick against his soul that touched a nerve, causing his temper to flare. But he understood why the British Museum did what they needed to do. He was quickly understanding that most choices, even if Noah was the one to execute them, didn't directly come from him. Would Noah have made the same choice if he was in charge? That was a hypothetical Louis didn't want to think about. But for now, he could imagine a world where Noah would stand up against Evangeline if the situation was right, and the stars aligned. After all, Noah was here with him now. British agents work under the British Museum. American agents work under your CIA and FBI and a cross-departmental organization that has what you all would consider unilateral jurisdiction in America and beyond. And Japanese agents work for the Neikaku Joho Chosashitsu. A voice said to the right of them. Both Noah and Louis turned quickly toward the unexpected voice. Neither had noticed the woman, about a few inches shorter than Louis, suddenly standing there. She was dressed in a sharp red and black uniform, as crisp as Noah's suit. It resembled a pantsuit with a skirt-like covering on top of it and an emblem on the center of her right breast pocket reminiscent of the Japanese flag, but with a kanji on it. Her hair was black, pulled into a tight, sleek ponytail. She had molten brown eyes that seemed to Louis to be the most expressive part of her. Eyes were always, for everyone, a window to the soul. But Louis could also tell that this woman's eyes would betray her without her knowing it. Right now, though, they were sharp, as if she were focused on the kill. "It translates to Cabinet Intelligence and Research Office," she said. "Unlike you and your British counterparts, our goals are simply to understand resonance, not weaponize it." "I wouldn't say that's fully true, Akana," Noah replied. "You want to understand it so you can weaponize it. Defending one's own borders isn't an act of aggression, Noah. However, coming here on British business and not gaining permission from us is. How do you know we're not here to enjoy the wonderful sights of Osaka, are you?" And this was the crux of it. For all their talk about being open with the Japanese, Lewis still wasn't sure how Noah was going to navigate the situation. In his estimation, there were two roads ahead of them. To the left, they could tell the truth and hope that this woman would support them, or at least stand out of their way, allowing them to do what they needed to do, and leave Japan as quickly and quietly as they had entered, like a whisper of smoke dancing on the breeze. And to the right, they could lie, try to talk their way out of this and keep their distance from Akana and her organization, somehow sidestepping their surveillance and staying one step ahead. Lewis was pretty sure he knew which Noah would prefer, and he wasn't entirely opposed to it either, because the left road meant that their mission would be exposed to more people. More people meant more complications, and Lewis couldn't help but remember the heaps of flesh that were Amy and her husband. He wouldn't let that happen again, no matter what Evangeline or Noah said. Lewis made a motion to move forward and explained to Akana why they were here, but Noah put the palm of his hand against Lewis's chest, gently pushing him back, a gesture half telling him to back off, and half shielding Lewis from the person in front of him. Noah rowed the third time he had put his safety on the line for Lewis. "We shouldn't talk about this here," Noah said quietly. "That's not an answer, and it seems your friend wants to say something," Akana replied, looking past Noah toward Lewis. "Talk to me, not him, Akana," Noah said firmly. "Agent to agent." Akana sighed, running her fingers slowly through her hair. "You still haven't changed." "I wouldn't say that. I'm being honest with you. That's more than either of us could say before." Whatever the history was between Akana and Noah, Lewis could tell now that the threads that bound them together were thicker and stronger than steel. The tit-for-tat that they shot across each other's bows was playful, almost flirtatious, though Lewis wouldn't go that far. If anything, it reminded him of two professional rivals. "No matter how honest you are, or how much you want me to think you've changed, Noah, the rules are simple. If you are here on magical business, you must announce yourself and gain permission. To the best of my knowledge, you didn't do that, correct? Which is an act of espionage and, I believe, enough for you to get your title revoked, correct? You know I wouldn't break international rules if it wasn't." Akana raised her right hand, specifically her pointer and middle finger. The other three curled in on themselves. The way Noah shifted his right foot to steady his stance was a warning. Lewis's eyes followed Noah's down to the ground and saw Akana's shadow. It was larger than any human shadow, and it was moving, expanding like a pool of ink spreading against a gray sheet of paper. Before Lewis or Noah could step out of the way, the pool of shadows formed a perfect circle and engulfed the three of them. "I'm giving you till midnight to leave. Promise me." "Akana," Noah said slowly. "Promise, me. I'm only giving you this warning because of your sister, Noah. She would want me to give you every chance to leave. Promise me." Lewis looked at Noah, his own breath caught in his throat. If she knew about Noah's sister, she would know how she died. And if she knew how she died, perhaps she knew about the paintings. He assumed that was Noah's line of thinking, that Akana could be an ally because of this shared connection. But Akana didn't seem interested in being an ally, and neither did Noah. He simply nodded curtly and bowed his head. The shadow retreated obediently behind her. Akana took a step back. Lewis, for the first time since she approached, noticed from the corner of his eye a flicker of movement. He couldn't make it out, but it seemed like barely seen people, blurs that came in and out of focus for only a fraction of a second, long enough for his mind to register, but not long enough for him to fully see. "Midnight, Noah. That's when my kindness runs dry." Chapter 19. According to every app Lewis could find, midnight in Osaka would arrive in roughly 5 or so hours, giving them less than a quarter of a day to solve the mystery of this specific painting and get out of Japan. Never before had Lewis hated time zones more than now, even more than he hated daylight savings time. The ultimatum seemed impossible, and something in the depths of Lewis's soul pulled tightly like a wire, told him that they should return to London. The idea of failing wasn't something he liked to concede, but being listed as an enemy to a superpower wasn't on his list either. After their meeting with Akana, Noah had stood in the middle of the sidewalk for a solid 10 seconds watching her retreating form. As she blended in with the crowd, Lewis's eyes followed too, uncertain if the way that she disappeared, slowly at first and then all at once, was a matter of distance between them or actually magic. He looked left and right before spotting a small izakaya across the street. "Come on," he said to Noah. "Let's regroup." Grabbing Noah's shoulder and tugging him firmly, he made his way across the street into the izakaya. After Lewis gave the universal symbol for two of holding up the fingers, the owner offered them a table, an inquisitive look on his face. Lewis wondered how often in this part of Osaka they got tourists, let alone tourists that looked like them, but he didn't dwell on it. Instead, he filled the awkward pregnant silence with words. "The good news is at least we got to travel to a new city," he said, forcing a smile onto his lips. "Have you ever been to Japan before?" Noah didn't answer, his eyes glued to the menu in front of him, but to Lewis. He was boring a hole through the table, past it and into the depths of the earth. Lewis sighed and leaned back. "We knew it wasn't going to be easy," he said. "Evangeline is going to have my head." Noah's voice was quiet, dropping to nothing more than a whisper. But even with the crackling live wire of voices that came from the other patrons, Lewis heard him clearly. "We shouldn't have come." Lewis wasn't going to push back against that, not because he agreed or disagreed, but because it just didn't seem the time or the place. It was very clear that Akana was someone Noah didn't feel like he could overpower. Even the small display of her magic was clearly impressive. What hope did Lewis have to convince Noah, who had already resigned himself to losing, that winning was possible? Then again, Lewis thought, fighting Akana brought up more problems than solutions. If they were trying to stay under the radar, engaging in combat in public, let alone with an agent in Japan, didn't seem like the way to do it. And so instead he shrugged. Lewis understood how hypocritical it was to be judging Noah, but time was not on their side. Not only because Akana had given them an edict, but he imagined Evangeline wouldn't be very patient with them once she realized where they had gone. But something that Akana had said interested him, and as Lewis had quickly learned from the past to paintings, many questions could be answered by unspooling history. "Akana and your sister knew each other." Lewis ended it as a statement, rather than a question, but added an open ending to it. "You never told me that." "I never told you on purpose," Noah said, his voice cold and direct. Even though there was a sharpness to it, Lewis wasn't offended. Sighing, he glanced up when a waitress came over to them, and with broken Japanese, he ordered Kirin Ichiban for both of them. Noah's eyes rose as he arched one brow inquisitively. Lewis shrugged in response. "I watched a lot of anime when I was younger," he said almost sheepishly. "I'm sure they're used to it from American tourists." A flicker of a smile for only a moment, like the initial spark of a flint, passed over Noah's face. He sighed quietly. Lewis allowed him the space to speak as much or as little as he wanted. "Akana and my sister Ishida were junior agents together," he explained. "When my sister left India and came to England, one of her first missions sent her to Singapore." Noah paused, pinching the bridge of his nose. "You have to understand, Lewis, my sister always wanted more. She believed she was destined for more, that her magic shouldn't be used for petty, simple squabbles that only reinforced India, but could instead be used to make the world a better place." And Lewis interrupted, keeping his words slow and cautious, as if saying the wrong thing might scare Noah away. "Evangeline jumped on that, right?" Noah nodded, rubbing both sides of his face with his hands. "I would never speak ill about my boss, and I wouldn't ask you to, but yes, Evangeline has a talent for finding those whose dreams are all-consuming, and turning those dreams into nightmares. There's an argument to be had that manipulating those who believe in a higher cause is the way to create some of the best, strongest individuals. If you believe in something greater than yourself, if you believe that you are destined for something greater than yourself, then you will do everything in your power to achieve it, and someone who inspires you to achieve that greatness, you'll follow them to the ends of the earth." Lewis knew the feeling well when he thought about it, the way that Evangeline played on his desire to be well known, to be someone of import, had gone amiss before. But it was very clear that dangling that carrot in front of him was a ploy. Even if she did intend to follow through with it, two things could be true at once. "And so, I'm guessing she told your sister that she could help her achieve this goal. Make the world a better place?" Noah nodded, smiling and thanking the waitress in near-perfect Japanese when she brought the beer to them. Lewis frowned and Noah winked. "I never said I couldn't speak Japanese," he said before continuing. "Akana and Ishida met in Singapore. The British Museum had her investigating a cursed artifact, very similar to what we're doing now. It was a site that had the ability to extract the bloodline traits of the individuals whose lives it took and pass them along to the person who held it. Of course, naturally, as I'm sure you can guess, that could be a very dangerous power. Consider what might happen if the blade slashed and killed you, or Akana. That manipulation of shadow that she did, that you saw," Noah said. It allows her to create space within our world where the rules of logic bend to her own, including the rules of magic. Imagine what someone could do if they could amass more and more bloodline traits like that. So why did Evangeline send your sister after it? Lewis asked. It seems like that should go to a more senior agent. Normally it would, Noah confirmed, but it was a test. For all Evangeline's flaws, if she believes in you, she's willing to push you until you break and then mend you back together into something stronger. It's how agents under her purview become some of the best agents in the arcane service. And my sister loved that. The thing was, England didn't know exactly where the item was. Japan did. Evangeline had originally tried to reach out to her counterpart in Akana's organization, but they were having nothing of it. But Ishida, who had yet to be in the field outside England, posed as someone antagonizing to the English government. Akana back then was more critical of her nation, and they bonded over that. Your sister manipulated her into showing the location of the item and then double-crossed her. Lewis guessed. Noah took a sip and nodded. They lost contact after that. I asked Ishida about it, but she would never talk about it. I can understand why Akana doesn't trust me or England, and by extension you. Lewis remained silent for a moment, knitting his brow over his next question. You might as well ask it, Noah said. If you knew we were going to Osaka, you knew that you would probably cross paths with Akana again. Noah nodded. That's correct. And if you knew that, then you knew this would come up. Why didn't you bring this up earlier? There was a part of me, Noah said, without hesitating to think over his answer, that hoped Akana might have put it in the past. He shook his head. I like to think that when Ishida passed, she was a different agent than she was when she was young. Not as brazen, not as confident. But you know that's not true, Lewis said quietly, gently. It sounds like she was Evangeline's protege, and Evangeline wouldn't think twice about double-crossing someone if it helped England. Noah leaned back in his chair, studying Lewis. There was no feeling of a mind crawling over his psyche, but he could tell that Noah was trying to pull as much information as he could from Lewis's body language. Is that what you think of me? He asked. That I'm just Evangeline's pawn. Lewis didn't know how to answer the question. Truthfully, there was no easy answer. There was a part of him that understood that Noah was simply doing his job, but at the same time, Noah had made it very clear where his allegiances lay. At least moments ago he had. But then he did a complete about-face and was willing to risk it all for this one mission. Perhaps, Lewis thought, the reason why wasn't because Noah truly believed that Lewis was on the right path, but because when he realized the painting was in Osaka, there was a way to make amends for what his sister had done to Akana, and in some way that brought him closer to his sister. But before Lewis could even broach the subject, freezing cold liquid splashed against his chest. He stood up with a yelp, the front of his shirt stained light brown from the spilled beer bottle thanks to the clumsiness of a passing waitress. The girl immediately and fervently apologized in Japanese. At least that was what Lewis assumed she was saying. It's fine. It's fine, he quickly replied. Noah stood up, grabbing a handful of napkins and beginning to blot at his shirt. I'm just going to wash up, Lewis said. Give me a moment. Noah smiled slightly, a look of concern still on his face. Walking briskly through the bar, dozens of eyes on him, and hearing the continuing apologies of the waitress, Lewis slid into one of the restroom stalls and locked the door. Leaning against the wall, he sighed, closing his eyes. This wasn't going according to plan, but then again, how foolish of him to think that it would. Nothing about the Macabre was easy. They had just learned that somehow, someway, Edgar Dumont had attached his psyche to a hospital and cloaked it from anyone's prying eyes. A magical sheen that lasted over 150 years. Did they really understand anything about these paintings, or were they swinging blindly? How could they? Lewis's thoughts were cut off by a voice, a familiar voice, speaking in front of him. I'm not a big fan of manipulating the minds of our own people, Akana said, her voice clear as day, as if she was only a few inches in front of him. In fact, I'm going to get an earful from my boss about it tomorrow morning, if not tonight, when he finds out. But I wasn't sure how to get you alone, and sometimes one has to be messy. Lewis's eyes snapped open. Akana, from the waist up, was visible through the mirror in the bathroom. She stood in an office, arms crossed, over her chest, studying Lewis, looking at the stain on his shirt. I hope that wasn't a cold, she said. Do you really care? Lewis asked back. Not really, but the shirt was nice. For now, that's the extent of my kindness. Why did you want to get me alone so badly? Lewis questioned. There's something different about you. Noah wouldn't have brought you here if it wasn't for a very specific reason. You're not a British agent. You don't carry yourself like one. You're very clearly American, yet you don't have the bravado or overconfidence of an American agent, which means you're willingly helping him in some way, not based on some edict from a superior. And if you're helping him in some way that required him to come here, risking everything, that is of interest to me. So I'm giving you, not him, you the option to explain why. Lewis hesitated to give her any piece of information after how she had not only treated them out in public, but manipulated others to get him alone. Akana was playing three-dimensional chess while he was playing checkers, having just learned how to play the game. What if finding the Macabre was his goal? This was the most direct path there. Taking a few steps forward to the mirror, Lewis sighed. He fished the napkins out of his pocket, holding the corners together as best he could to make the full image. "We're looking for this location," he said. "There's something here that we need. I don't know if you've heard of them, the Macabre," but before Lewis could even finish his sentence, her gaze snapped up to him, a burning aura in her eyes. Every nerve in his body told him to step back from the mirror. He only made it half a step before her hand reached out through the glass, grabbed his throat, and yanked him through it. A feeling of nothingness passed over him, weightlessness, as every bit of his essence disappeared and reappeared in another location within a second. As his senses returned, Lewis yelped. He stumbled, his feet barely having time to find purchase before Akana spun him around and slammed him against the wall beside her mirror. "Start talking now," she said coldly, "and explain to me as quickly and succinctly as you can why you have a drawing of my family home." Chapter 20. Emotions passed over Akana's face like a string of waves crashing against rocks. First there was confusion, then there was anger, then sadness, before settling on frustration. Her brown eyes, sharp and focused, slowly lifted from Lewis's crumpled napkins to lock her gaze on him. It was the first time since the house collapsing on him that he actually felt fear. "Is this some type of joke?" she asked, her voice venomous. Lewis frowned. "I don't understand what you're talking about." "Bullshit," Akana said, leaning forward. "So, you and Noah come here, into my country to pull this shit and expect what?" Everything to be fine, Lewis took a step to the side, attempting to put some distance between them, but failed. "Akana, I don't have any idea what you're talking about." She snatched the napkins from him, holding them up in his line of sight, the tip of his nose brushing against them. "No, you somehow happen to have a drawing of my family home. You think that's a coincidence." Lewis, as gently as possible, lowered her hand. "Wait, go back. You're telling me that you know this is my home," she said, interrupting him, giving him no chance to explain himself. "I don't know what type of magic you have, Lewis, or what game you think you're playing, or what Noah signed you up for, but this cross-cultural agreement between the British and the Americans that you to think is enough to best the Japanese isn't going to stand." He opened his mouth, attempting to deliver some type of reason, but a chill filled the air, a familiar one that caused him to glance down and see that his shadow was no longer in the lumpy shape of a human, but a perfect circle about 5 feet in diameter, encompassing both him and Akana. "Shit," he thought. Before Lewis could process anything else, he sank to his knees, and not of his own volition. It felt like gravity had been changed, forcing him down, and only the tip of Akana's fingers under his chin kept his head up, forcing him to look at her in supplication. "I could kill you," she said. He didn't doubt it, but, again, he was in no position to say anything. Second by second, the pressure in the space became heavier and heavier against his body. At first, it felt like a hard massage, but 5 seconds later, it felt like his bones were being pressed under too much weight, more weight than he could bear. "I could snap you in half right now. Change the atmosphere in this space to dissolve your body so Noah would have no idea where to find you, and I would be perfectly within my rights." Again, Lewis wanted to say something, to do something. He tried to will his mind to use the runes on the stump of his right arm to pull something, a book off the table to hit her in the head and break her focus. But even as he tried, Noah's warning rang true. Inside this black circle, Akana's will was law. He couldn't focus on anything but her, as if all his thoughts were centered on the woman who literally held his soul in her hand. Yet he saw again the roller coaster of emotions on her face. There was still anger, yes, but there was also sadness, as if killing wasn't something she was accustomed to, which seemed at odds with how fearful Noah was of her retaliation. No, Lewis thought, there was something more. There was recognition. And then it clicked. You've seen it, he forced out, his voice like a gurgle. The painting. Now you're home, you know what I'm talking about. Akana's face twitched only half an inch, but it was enough for Lewis to assume that he was right. As if in confirmation, the pressure lightened slightly, enough so his lungs no longer burned, and he didn't feel a throbbing soreness over every inch of his body. Akana was quiet, clearly processing how she was going to respond. Lewis continued. Help me, he said. The small opening had given him a little more energy, and the pressure wasn't nearly as crushing. If I'm right, we can neutralize the painting and help save the world together. If I'm wrong, I know you're wrong, she said. But then, immediately seeming to contradict herself, she said, if you are wrong, I will be putting you in jail. You and Noah, do you understand? Lewis nodded as best as he could with the pressure on him. He knew he wasn't wrong. At least he hoped he wasn't wrong. It seemed apparent Akana wasn't sure he was wrong, and that seemed like a good sign. Yet in the back of his mind, he couldn't help but worry about how he had overstepped once again. This could cause a deeper rift and tension between the powerful countries. This was bigger than what happened in Perth. Except, also, it wasn't. People died there. People hadn't yet died here. That was the difference, and that was why he was doing this. He wasn't so naive, however, as to think anyone at the highest echelons of either nation cared about such trivial matters as individual lives. Even Evangeline only seemed to care about the greater good when it helped accomplish her end goal. Would Evangeline ever accept his apology? Did he think he needed to apologize? He almost laughed at that might have. Actually, if he had enough control over his body. It didn't matter what he thought. Evangeline had made that abundantly clear. And if magic could do what Akana could do, create temporary bubbles of isolation where the laws of physics were broken, he wondered what Evangeline could do to his mind if she truly wanted to. Well, he didn't really wonder. He had an idea, and none of it sat well with him. Suddenly, the feeling of resistance against his body was lifted. He let out a gasp as his hand fell to the ground, bent over on his knees. He gasped for air. Akana took a step back, smoothing her fingers over her uniform. She studied Lewis, but it wasn't with a look of compassion or care, more with idle curiosity. You decided to come here alone, didn't you? She said. You're the one who dragged me in here. He replied. I mean, you chose to come to Japan without Noah's consent. I planned it without Noah's awareness until the very end. He came along with me willingly. She nodded, and Lewis was surprised when she extended her hand to him. At first, he didn't take it, thinking touching it would create some sort of cursed bond between them that he would regret having. But she didn't move her hand back. She didn't take no for an answer, and slowly he accepted her assistance. Hoisted up to stand, he nodded. I knew that Noah would say it was a bad idea. Because it is, she said. I could have killed you right there, and I'm still not sure that I shouldn't have. Assuming this painting is what you say it is, that it is so important and dangerous, why do you think I won't take it for? Myself? Japan could do wondrous things with a painting with as much power as you seem to say it has. I know, Lewis said. I would expect the same thing from the Americans or the British, so I'll ask you directly, what makes you think I'll be different? Lewis wasn't sure. That was always the flaw, or one of the main flaws in his plan. But if she saw what these paintings could do, he liked to think that Akana would do the right thing, not because she trusted him, per se, but because she become an agent to protect Japan. Like Noah had said, it had always been her priority. He just needed to remind her of that. He decided to take a gamble. You're a good agent. Noah told me about how you were one of the best that he or his sister ever knew. He lied. Still the best, she informed him, her voice sharp, a careful warning that he might be crossing boundaries. Still the best, he corrected himself, and the best understands that sometimes some things don't deserve to exist. Their existence causes more harm than good. Akana nodded in acceptance. Her eyes shifted toward the door on the opposite end of her office, as she paused as if she was debating something. I can help you, he said, interrupting her thoughts before she could decide. You're not going to be able to deal with that painting on your own. Akana arched her brow. It's not that you're not powerful enough, he said. Again, he thought about what Noah had said, how keeping your magic close to your vest was your strongest advantage in a duel against magicians. But this wasn't a duel. This was a trust fall. He was holding out his arms, and if he expected Akana to fall back, she needed to know that he was going to catch her. I'm the only person who can stop them, he said after a pause. I know that sounds egocentric, but I need you to believe me. It's possible for others to destroy them, but from what I gather, the amount of energy and damage that would cause would be catastrophic. Bringing me with you allows us to save as many people as possible. Then, just because he thought it couldn't hurt, if nothing else, if the or any crazy magical rondo coming after it, because unless you're going to spend the rest of your days protecting it, do you think Japan has enough agents to keep this safe forever? She narrowed her eyes, taking the compliment at her prowess along with the slight at her nation. But he could see her thinking, and Louis knew he had struck home. He'd barely gotten a taste of field work, but the moment Evangeline had tried to keep him chained to a stake in the yard, he had been ready to bolt. For someone as powerful as Akana, the idea of being the only one powerful enough to keep others from coming after such an artifact meant that would be her fate too. Do the right thing and be a little self-serving, he thought, as if he could. Well, her to agree to what was in his mind. If it didn't work, he'd then try another angle, because all he knew was that he wouldn't let Perth happen again. Akana still didn't seem fully convinced, but she shrugged. You're not an agent under my control, she said. If you die, that's up to you. I'm not going to bat an eye, and Japan's not going to care. You came here of your own volition. You die of your own volition. He understood why she said it, but he also wondered if she didn't quite realize the danger she herself would be getting into. How the peculiar quirk of his bloodline made him necessary. He wasn't powerful enough as I mentioned in the everyday sense, but the skill he had made him the key to this particular mission. She might be trying to scare him off, might laugh at the idea that he was going to protect her, but either way, he was going with her. Thank you, he said. There's no reason to thank me, she told him, walking toward the door. You didn't kill me, he almost pointed out, but she already knew that. Akana pulled from her pocket a small pen, drawing a runic symbol on the door, tracing a pattern she had probably done many times before. She continued to speak to him while illustrating. As you said, I'm a very good agent, she told him. So, if I believe that this painting belongs in Japan's care, then I'm going to do everything in my power to keep it, even if that means killing you. If the painting is dangerous enough that it has to be destroyed, your life is caught in the crossfire, then so be it. You and I are not working together, Louis. We are the individuals who have a similar goal and who are alive for now. That's it. Louis nodded, keeping a decent distance from her. I can live with that, he said, just as long as you realize there might be a time when you won't live with that at all. When she stepped back, the circular symbol had many different kanji characters inside of it, with more than a dozen along the periphery. Akana pressed her right hand against the center, muttering in Japanese under her breath. The black ink slowly glowed white before the symbols outside the circle rotated counterclockwise, while the symbol in the center rotated clockwise. Faster and faster they spun until they didn't look like individual symbols, but one complete white line spinning on the outside and a white circle in the center. The spinning lasted for several seconds before the white pulsed out, taking over the entire door, giving it a pale glow. Then a pale mist retreated inward, like the process was going in reverse, and the door was no longer there. Instead, he saw a place in the same design as the sketch he had made in his fugue state. Akana looked over her shoulder. You make one wrong move, you do. One thing that makes me think that you are lying to me, and I will end you, she said. Louis nodded again. I understand. He wished he could tell Noah. Let his partner know that he was going to Akana's home. Let him know that he was still alive. But he was positive Akana was not going to ask questions before obliterating him if he took out his phone, and the way she was charging ahead, he didn't want to be left behind. Akana had already walked through the portal, looking at him impatiently from the other side. Louis took a deep breath, rolled his shoulders, and tried to get rid of the soreness from the forces that she had pressed on him. Louis remembered reading through the looking glass and how impossible things were deemed everyday occurrences in Wonderland. Talking animals, cakes that made you bigger, drinks that made you smaller, and danger that lurked around every corner, disguising itself as quirky cats with wide grins or powerful women with a confident demeanor. But one thing jumped out at him more than any other, something the Cheshire Cat said to Alice, that if you don't much care where you are going, any road can take you there if only you walk long enough. Perhaps this road would take him where he needed to go. To ending all of this, it might not be the most direct path, but with Akana leading the way, he would get there, eventually. Despite all that, he would do well. He thought to be careful, I would also do well to realize it's probably delayed, he thought as he stepped through, following Akana inside. Chapter 21. Something's not right. Those were the words Akana said the moment they stepped forth into her home. Lewis glanced behind, watching the door they had stepped through ripple and dissolve, revealing the true nature of the room they inhabited now, nothing more than a closet with knickknacks, blankets, and towels. He scanned the room around him. Compared to the office where they had been, he could tell that this place was ornate and beautiful, well kept, and polished with everything in its right place. But now that they were in it, he felt something wasn't quite right. To the left there was an opening, the room's concept wide and sparse. There were no doors or windows on that side, only the expansive sense of a field. The floor under them was polished wood, slippery under his feet. There was a soft smell of juniper and lavender in the air, and he could hear wind chimes in the distance. To his right, there were windows with shades pulled down, made of some type of thin parchment that allowed him to see the outlines of houses in the distance. He reasoned that they were somewhere in the countryside, far away from the hustle and bustle of a city. The home reminded him of the traditional buildings that people assumed were the primary architectural style of Japan, almost as much a movie set as a real place. The home could have been in Akana's family for years, if not generations, and someone had done a meticulous job of keeping the house the way it had always been. It struck Lewis how much this idea affected him, because he didn't own anything like that, and neither did his family, and possibly they never would. Like many African Americans, ownership in history went back only so far. With this idea came a twinge of envy coursing through his body, but also a wave of adoration. The home was truly beautiful, and he was about to say so when he fully clocked what Akana had said. Looking at her now, he could tell that something was off. "What's wrong?" he asked. Akana didn't speak, but she did walk forward, her steps slow and careful. Lewis followed, making sure to stay right behind her in her footsteps. "It's the quiet," she said. Still, from behind he couldn't see her gaze, but her head moved side to side, sweeping like a scanner, looking for anything. "Maybe your family's out," he suggested, "or asleep." "It's not that," she said. She fell silent again, as if she wasn't sure what words to use. Moving to the exact center of the room, she stopped suddenly enough for Lewis to almost bump into her back. "Stay close to me." He didn't bother telling her he was literally as close to her as someone could be without touching, because Lewis knew that tone. It was the one Noah had used before with him. He knew what it was like when someone was so focused that talking expended too much energy. Akana was preparing for something magical, something that she felt needed all of her focus to deal with, something that, especially because he had no idea what it was, scared the shit out of him. Akana was quiet for a minute. 1 minute turned into 2, 2 into 5, and Lewis wasn't sure she knew what she was doing at first, a thought he was embarrassed to think. He wouldn't have thought the same if Noah was quiet. He would have assumed that he was deep in thought, preparing. He should give her the same grace, but the tension coupled with knowing what these paintings could do had him on edge. A moment later, Akana suddenly sank to one knee, pressing both palms of her hands flat against the ground. Her shadow twitched and spun, swirling to create the same circle that it had before. She took a deep breath and exhaled, speaking a single word in Japanese. "Hagu." The shadow rippled and pulsed like it was exhaling the same as Akana, spreading to the farthest corners of the room. It snaked up the walls, crawling and scratching, moving to the ceiling, engulfing the whole room in darkness. That was not to say it was simply hard to see now. There was no light, no way to determine up from down, left from right. The darkness seemed endless and suffocating. As Lewis tried to find the seams, to find where the light had been, the separation between rooms, he realized the shadow had spread throughout the whole house, and there was nothing but blackness. There was no way of telling time. The only thing he could focus on was his own heartbeat, which he did to keep from panicking. He had once been brought by friends to the woods on a camping trip while at college in Georgia, and it had been a cloudy, moonless night. So far from the lights of the city, he had thought it was the darkest he had ever witnessed. And yet, there was always still something, some hint that let shapes have definition. Here, now, it was as if everything had turned two-dimensional, or four-dimensional, or some dimension that didn't represent reality. Stillness took over and made him feel like he was floating. He couldn't even feel the floor under his feet anymore. It was an odd, unsettling sensation until, from the farthest corners, the shadow retreated in complete reverse of what had just happened. A moment later, Akana's shadow was back inside her, and there was a palpable sense of relief. Until she spoke. There's foreign magic here, and I can't pull it off. It's like it's tied integrally to the house. Have you ever seen something like that before? Our house is magically protected. We are a magical family. This house has been engraved inside our family lineage for centuries. She paused, as if deciding to say something before giving in. In Japan, members of high-born magical families are buried under the house. The magic that resides inside the soul isn't wasted. It goes back into the home to keep it safe. Our house is our strongest magical point. I am at my strongest in my home, like my father. To put it bluntly, there should be nothing I cannot do. If there is magic here, it should be able to be stripped. But this, I can see it. I can feel it. I can even taste it. It tastes like copper, but I can't pull it off. It's not stronger than me, she said. It's just different. Louis had an idea of what that difference might be. Well, not an idea. He knew. Where's the painting in the house? She pointed, nodding for him to follow. Akana walked with confidence, but Louis was warier, knowing that if this was the painting's doing, if somehow it had created a way to drape Akana's house in dark shadows and magic, it might even have a way to twist their perception of the house itself. Rooms might disappear or move. He didn't put it above the magic that this painting had. But moments later, they were down the hallway, and a door was open. At first, neither of them made any movement, but Akana finally stepped forward, no fear evident in her body as she moved just inside the entryway. Louis, to her right, could see the profile of her face and saw the flicker of surprise that passed over her before it morphed and evolved into something more sinister. Who the fuck are you? The strange woman in the room barely gave them any regard, and for a moment didn't seem to notice that Akana was there at all, before her eyes drifted up to her and flickered over to Louis in recognition. I was wondering how long it would take you to find this one, she said, pushing off the desk where she perched, behind which sat a middle-aged man he assumed to be Akana's father, which seemed confirmed by how she tensed when she saw him. Akana's father reminded Louis of every single other man in power. He was dressed well, even inside his own house, and he had the look of someone who'd had every advantage financially to keep himself young. But there was something looming over him. Louis couldn't exactly see it, but he could feel it, like a dark malaise draped over his shoulders, like a flirtatious woman caressing his skin, or a thinly veiled shawl, sucking the life from him. Was it this woman, or the painting, or both? He was sure Akana could feel the same thing, but he imagined the sensation was new to her. It wasn't to him. There was a painting here, and it took him only a moment to scan the room and see it propped up in all its glory against the right-hand side of the office. Unlike the other Macabre paintings, this one was warm. There was a house with a beautiful landscape, hills that reminded him of someplace in the Alps. The colors were bright, far brighter than those of the other Dumonts, and it looked almost as if it were painted by somebody different, someone happy, someone who enjoyed painting visions of life and vibrant emotions. You see it too, don't you? The woman said. This is a different version of Edgar than before. A metamorphosis of art styles. Beautiful, really. I don't give a fuck about the painting, Akana said. What are you doing in my house? You should give a fuck, though, Louis thought. But there was no point in warning Akana. She was to focus on getting her father's attention, a task that seemed fruitless. It was as if his soul and mind were tied to the kanji on the paper. Oh, I wouldn't try to disturb him, darling, the woman said flippantly. Your father is a little distracted right now. She moved then, standing in front of Akana's father, blocking their view. What did you do to my father? Akana asked, taking a step forward. Magic sizzled and crackled in the air, smelling like burned plastic. The ends of Akana's black hair stood as if she had touched something electric, magic coursing through her veins, ready to be expelled. But the woman raised a single finger, and Akana let out a soft gasp as the magic sizzled into nothingness. I didn't do anything, the woman said, not at all fazed by the surprised and confused look on Akana's face. But I do have a question for you. The question wasn't directed to Akana, but to Louis. How much do you know about these paintings you're trying to purify? Louis knew the question was loaded, and that the woman had information she was keeping close to her vest, possibly even fishing to figure out what the British knew that she didn't. So in perhaps the smartest move he'd made in a while, Louis kept his mouth shut. The woman continued, I'll go first. Then, did you know that these paintings are actually alive? She asked. Each one of them is a representation of a moment in time when Edgar Dumont imbued them with his emotions. A piece of his soul went inside them, emotions.spirit.intent. The basic tenets of magic, Akana gritted out. Every magician knows that. True, but these are slightly different. You, Lewis, have seen their effects firsthand. The painting in Australia and the one that the British Museum had that they forced you to purify. They didn't force me to do anything, Lewis informed her. The woman snapped her fingers like a professor who latched onto a kernel of curiosity in a student's question that could mold into the right answer. But that's interesting, isn't it? Because if they didn't force you, then you are far more enigmatic than I ever thought. The woman paused, as if expecting some response, but Lewis just looked at her, confused. A puzzled expression took over her own face, but only for a moment. It sat awkwardly on her, as if this woman was rarely ever confused. They didn't tell you, did they? She chuckled. Of course they didn't. That would be too noble. And when have the British ever truly been noble? Again she paused, this time, though, as if waiting for some applause or confirmation. Lewis gave her neither. Each one of these paintings has a soul. They're living, breathing. They're not only charged with emotional and spiritual energy operating on a loop stuck in a moment, but they reacted to different things. Individuals in the here and now will have the same energy as them. The woman walked to the painting, trailing the middle finger on her left hand over the gold frame. And you, see, these paintings remember who made them. They remember the pain and the emotion that went into them, and they are stuck in an endless cycle of feeling the sorrow and trauma from that moment. And you, being Edgar's descendant, remind them of that. When they find somebody who matches the same emotional pain as them, they activate a shared symbiosis of suffering. That's what's happening here. I told you, I don't give a fuck about the paintings, Akana said. And I don't care about you, the woman said. But if you listen to me, you'll get the answers to your question about your father, and maybe about what we can potentially do about it. Akana didn't try to move again, not in a way that was threatening, but Lewis could tell she wanted to pounce at the woman with every muscle she had. The woman's magic was strong, though. She had nullified Akana's magical abilities with barely a flick of her hand. The Japanese agent was smart enough to know that she couldn't win straight on, so she let the woman talk, her eyes flickering between the woman and her father, who was still frozen in space. Miss Ayako, you and your father suffered a terrible loss some years ago. No person should lose their parent like you did. That accident while she was traveling abroad was inexcusable. You don't get to talk about my mother, Akana said, her voice a venomous threat. The woman raised her hands in a defensive, apologetic motion. I'm sorry. That was ill-spoken of me. But that emotion, that sorrow your father feels, it hasn't gone away. This painting he bought, I believe around that time retail therapy. You called it when you found it for him latched onto that because it has the same origin of creation. Lewis finally decided to really study the painting and not the brushstrokes, not the colors, not the way that Edgar Dumont was changing his artistic style over the years, but the painting itself. He saw from the distance, through the space between them, speckled spots that resembled humans without much detail. He saw the lake that reminded him of the one from the first painting, and he saw three people standing in the doorway, one clearly a woman, one Edgar, and one a man, nondescript, at his side. Knowing his name won't help you this time, the woman said to him, somehow anticipating what he would attempt with Edgar's painting. He didn't have time to question how she knew about that because she was already saying, anyone who knows much about Edgar Dumont, which are few, considering the lack of a legacy he left, knows this one. The lingering, she went on, created when Edgar Dumont left England, fled to the Swiss Alps to restart his life, and fell in love with a woman who almost made him feel whole again. That's why this painting looks so idyllic, so beautiful, so still. She was the first person in his life to make him feel like he was someone other than the pain of his past. It's a beautiful painting, honestly. It's a beautiful painting that reflects the possibility of what could be when we open our hearts and forget about the sorrow that weighs on our shoulders. How is it doing this? He asked. The woman smiled. Do you think understanding the how will, what, help you cleanse them? It's a good start. She shook her head. You're asking the wrong question. We'll get to the how right now. I think the why is more important. What's the subtext? Lewis didn't like the way she spoke down to him, but she was right. The more he thought, the more he focused. Every painting could do something that was reflected in the image. He let out a gasp that made the woman smirk. Exactly. Before anyone could move, the woman took her right hand and pushed it forward against the painting, much like Lewis would to enter it. But instead, magic surged outward in response, a pulse of it rippling through the air and causing Lewis's bones to tingle. The woman paused, confused, and tried again and again and again. But each time the painting refused her entry. "Fine," she muttered. "We can do this the hard way." "Like hell," Akana interjected. Her image flickered out of existence, for only a fraction of a moment, appearing a second later behind the woman. But before Akana could act, the woman turned and threw her left hand out, colliding with Akana's chest. Lewis heard the rushing of wind roar like a gale around her fingers and launched forward, slamming into Akana's body and throwing her against the far wall, where she landed in a crumpled heap. He could hear her breathing, and he also heard the shifting of the wood beneath her as she crawled toward the center of the room. "You didn't have to do that." But the woman didn't respond, ignoring Lewis's concern. "This painting, the lingering, has the power to create idealism," the woman said, "to make the world seem like what it could be." Akana's father, when his daughter suggested that he take it, had no idea that when he touched the painting, it would have the same sorrow as him, and so it created this beautiful image of idealism. Not for him, no, for her. With her attention back on the painting, the woman reached forward, grabbing the golden frame with both hands. As she yanked it off the wall, Lewis expected to see a hanger or some sticky residue of what was used to connect the piece to the wall. But instead he saw veins, tendrils of dark, blood-red vines, dozens of them connecting the painting to the wall. And with one hard pull, they snapped, and everything shuddered with a roar. It sounded like a woman howling in pain, unrestricted, animalistic. Brought him to his knees, clutching his head. Akana the same. The only person unaffected was Akana's father, still looking glassy-eyed at the paper in front of him. In the space of a blink, the room around them changed. It happened in a second. The beautiful, pristine house Akana had grown up in was replaced by something derelict and broken. The house reminded him of what the house in Perth would have looked like if it had been abandoned after its destruction for months, if not years. The wood was rotting. The paintings that adorned the wall had been warped by time and water. Everything was layered and woven with death. This place had been destroyed and left to rot, to sit in its own filth over time. That included Akana's father, no longer a man, but a desiccated skeleton. "You see, Miss Ayako, your father only wanted one thing, to make you feel better, to help take the pain away from you losing your mother. He was a proud man, like you are a proud woman. He raised you to be such, and I believe you would be honored to see how you fought for him. But that pride was his downfall. The painting identified with it and seeped the life out of him to create this beautiful illusion. To the painting, helping you deal with the loss of your mother by making you think your father was fine, and helping your father give you some peace, was a kindness. And everyone who might threaten that peace was put under the same spell. There was no time that you ever came to visit your father or called him that he wasn't suffering, but you never saw it. You saw this beautiful home still erect and taken care of because that's what he wanted you to see. He wanted you to see peace, not to see how his heart was blackening and corroding on the inside. The painting gave him that. It gave you that. In exchange for his life, the painting fed off his resonance, Lewis said. The houses too. It bled it dry. Exactly, she said, nodding in approval. It was the price your father paid for you, Miss Ayako. The woman twisted her hand, and Akana's body slowly rose, hovering in the air. She was limp, with cuts and bruises all over, but she would survive. With the woman's beckoning motion, Akana's body floated toward the woman, hovering face to face, unable to move, unable to do anything. Your father was a valiant man and a smart one too. Your family is one of the most powerful in Japan. He knew what he was getting himself into. He knew what he was giving you. I imagine that this world would have continued until there was nothing left of him, nothing to anchor this illusion of the home. He did that for you, she said once again, and Lewis couldn't help but think there was both a mixture of sympathy and scorn in these repetitions. You should be honored to know that. Once again, the woman's gaze shifted toward Lewis. The museum has you looking for each individual painting and trying to uncover the connections. To find the next one. Have you asked them why they're so willing to sacrifice their agents for it? What should be so valuable that they throw away human bodies like scraps of paper? You should probably ask them before you continue forward, Lewis. I'd be curious to see how your opinion of them changes. Do you want to be part of a movement that is willing to affect the course of history in such a way? You don't seem like someone who would, but nonetheless, with a casual and callous flick of her hand, she tossed Akana's body toward Lewis. He reacted in time, grabbing her so that she didn't land on the ground. He cushioned the blow, his back slamming against the wall, which cratered from his impact, making him stumble. But he was able mostly to hold his ground. The woman seemed impressed, giving a small nod of appreciation. "Ask her," she said. "Ask Evangeline why she cares so much about these paintings. Ask about your mother. There are only 7 left. Louis, you're running out of time to decide your own destiny. Do not let her determine it for you. Wait," he cried out. "Who are you?" "No one," and then she disappeared. Chapter 22. Cassandra had gotten sloppy, letting hubris get the best of her. That was a mistake she could not afford. She knew better than to expect any Japanese agent to go on a mission on their own. Sure, having Louis by Akana's side was some level of support, but it wasn't the support she should have been afraid of. The cages always accompanied a high-level agent. Even if the agent didn't request their presence, they lingered in the corner out of view. Akana probably didn't even notice them. They were as second nature as a layer of skin or breathing. But Cassandra knew better. At least, she should have. She knew that the moment the girl stepped through the portal and brought herself to her childhood home on the outskirts of Osaka, they would have noticed her disappearance. They would have mobilized some of their most skilled agents who worked in the shadows, watching, waiting, finding the perfect moment to strike, understanding the balance between letting an agent do their task on their own and ensuring their agent's success. Cassandra had prepared for this. She'd studied and watched Akana from the periphery for the past 6 months. She had known the painting was in Japan and knew that eventually the British Museum would lead her to it. But she had let the sweet taste of success, the dripping gold of confidence, get the best of her. Looking back on the interaction, she considered herself lucky. She had moved a fraction of a second before one of the cages had struck with their short blades, barely missing her skin. Cassandra was a skilled magician in her own right. She learned much over the 130 years of training. It was the only reason she could hold her own against 3 of Akana's guards. If the fight had gone on any longer, she would have lost. There was no doubt about it. But considering the fact that their goal was to protect Akana, and she wasn't in the best state at the moment, their priorities were split. And that was the advantage she had used. Cassandra had wrapped herself in the cool embrace of shadows, her eyes locking with Louis as she melted into the in-between space of reality. It was where the gods lived, a place of magic and arcana that she hated to travel in. The gods tended not to look favorably on those who upset the balance of nature itself, and Cassandra's existence did just that. She didn't like to spend much time here, but this time she didn't have a choice. Transportation spells took time to prepare, an exact location, an endpoint, an A and AB, a through line. Knives coming at her throat weren't exactly conducive to putting the spell together, though. So, traveling through the stream of arcana, the magical source that so many called resonance, the sea in which the gods lived, was the fastest way. Cassandra hated the silky feeling, the stickiness of magic that clung to her when she stepped out of thin air. Unlike a transportation spell that needed some type of entryway, door, puddle, or shadow, she simply blinked out of existence and blinked into it again, almost bumping into a poor girl who was rushing on her way to class. "Sorry," Cassandra said, poised and composed as ever on the outside at least, while on the inside, she could still feel the hot, yearnful gaze of a god who looked down upon her as she rode the ripples of the magical stream. She knew that was a price she would have to pay later. She'd spent too much time in the in-between lately, and the gods were taking notice. But for now, she was safe, far away from Japan, with what she needed, the painting. Now she just had to decide what she was going to do with it. It was a bit of a Hail Mary, her actions in Osaka, and looking back on it, she felt a little ashamed of her reaction. How brash, how foolish of her, to try and destroy it then and there. But she was, for a moment, desperate, hungry to solve just one problem out of the myriad of problems that had piled up over the years. But for now, the painting was in France, back home. She would deal with that tomorrow, or the day after. She needed a break. Compartmentalization was one of Cassandra's best skills. It always had been. Being able to lump specific tasks into chests, lock them up tight, and then kick them into the endless black sea of her consciousness, letting them settle at the bottom of the ocean until they were needed, allowed her to do feats that many men claimed they could do but never truly accomplished. She had lived many lives in the past 100+ years, stayed one step ahead of the curve, and always survived. That was something she was proud of, something she would always be proud of. And despite hubris almost laying her low in Osaka, she wasn't one to cast off a skill because it reeked of pride. She would just take a bit of extra care in not letting it go to her head. 130 years, and still much to learn. Then, that should pause the karma police for at least a little bit. Dusting off her jacket, she rolled her shoulders. As she did, her outfit changed, shifting from the gray pantsuit she had worn in Osaka to a more casual outfit, a jean jacket covering a band t-shirt with a pair of matching jeans and stilettos. Her blonde hair, cut short in a bob before, was now a high ponytail pulled tight, and she fished out of her pocket something that moments ago didn't exist but now felt heavy in her hand, a pair of black glasses. The illusion wasn't needed, and in fact, it wasn't truly an illusion. She was wearing these clothes, simply changing the matter of the fabric into something different. The once before and the now was. But the appearance was more what her great-nephew was used to, and considering he was the only living relative Cassandra bothered to keep in contact with, she was willing to bend herself slightly to make him comfortable. That was what family did. Correct. After all, she did owe him a visit, and subconsciously, she knew when she left Osaka, this was the only place she wanted to be. He was the only family she had left still breathing, besides Charles's child. Cassandra waved to the doorman, flashing a smile. They knew each other well enough. She didn't have to magic her way into the apartment complex, a high-rise that overlooked the Golden Gate Bridge. "Good evening, Duncan," she said. "I hope you've been well." "Yes, ma'am," he said, nodding in approval. "Very well. My daughter got into Columbia, actually." Cassandra flashed a smile. It wasn't a fake one. She enjoyed talking to Duncan, a handsome man with strong features, the type of man she would bet in another life and perhaps still might. She could see herself spending the next few days in San Francisco lying low. She might as well have some fun. "I told you before, you don't need to call me ma'am. Cassandra is fine. Cassie, even we're friends." Duncan smiled. "I would prefer to call you ma'am." Cassandra sighed, signing into the log system. "If you must, well, congratulations on your daughter. If she needs any contacts while she's there, let me know. I know many people in New York." Duncan nodded in appreciation and pressed a few buttons on the phone on his desk. "I have your aunt for you." Cassandra knew who was on the other end. Her nephew. She had long ago dropped all the greats that would accurately describe their true relation, Charles, and a moment later, she was in the elevator, riding smoothly to the 30th floor. Before the apartment door could open, halfway down the hallway, she heard the squeal of a young child. She flinched slightly, but far less than she did when the child was first born and his shrill screams filled the hospital room. Funny, she thought, considering how she used to be a nurse. Life and death were in equal balance in her life, her past life. How things changed over the years. Cassandra wasn't sure if she had ever wanted kids, and that option had been taken from her long ago. She could have children, of course, but the idea of bringing them into the world, knowing the curse that she had and not knowing if it would pass on to them, felt particularly cruel. And so she hadn't. Perhaps because of this, for many years, she resented the presence of children, the sound of their joy, the echoes of their voices, simply a reminder of what she could not have. But the same curse that affected her did not affect her brother, and through him, through his lifeline, his lineage, she observed. For the past 130-odd years, she had watched, closer to some of the children than others. Some didn't even know she existed, but because of her, they all had good lives. For what was the point of long life and magic if you couldn't at least reward your family? Cassandra had been smart, cultivating financial success, manipulating the stocks in small ways here or there. Knowledge from the past led to foresight. No one saw her chess moves blatantly on display, and her money had grown exponentially. With coins spread across the world in different banks, Cassandra was one of the richest women alive, and as such, that money had gone toward ensuring the people who shared her blood were taken care of. Her great-nephew was no different. "Hello there, sweetie," she said, her voice cooing as the little boy wobbled over to her. For a moment, she was concerned truly, actually, full-heartedly concerned. Had Charles let this child wander alone down the hallway? But that fear was appeased when her great-nephew, roughly 30 years old, leaned against the doorframe and smiled at her. Of those who happened to share her blood scattered across the world, Cassandra was partial to him, due in large part to this toddling ball of germs coming for her. She looked up from the baby at Charles. He looked most like her brother, with features that had been repeated genetically, the same sharp jaw, the premature salt-tan pepper hair, the bright blue eyes that sparkled with wonderment. She remembered growing up with that face, and in her great-great-nephew she felt in some way, shape, or form that her brother was still alive, a man whom she had last seen when she pledged her soul to the convent to become a nun. And then, when he had died after the curse had been placed upon her, Cassandra closed herself off to the world. He was dead by the time she decided to open herself back up, one of her biggest regrets. Perhaps that was why she cared so much for Charles. Perhaps it was because she was lonely. He was wondering about you, Charles said, taking the baby from her. Even said Auntie Cassie a couple of days ago. Cassandra rolled her eyes. I highly doubt that, she retorted, but kissed him on the cheek. Where's your wife? She asked, closing the door as she entered the sprawling, two-bedroom apartment. Charles ran a pharmaceutical startup in which she was a silent partner. Charles didn't know she was one of the investors, but her money had helped to ensure that he, his wife, and their child were taken care of. And that was all that she cared about. She's out. You actually just missed her. I'm surprised you didn't pass her outside. She'll be back soon. Cassandra had known that, but it was polite to ask. In fact, she had been waiting outside for Amanda to leave. For as much as she had an affinity for Charles, there was something about that woman she didn't like. She couldn't pinpoint it. Of course, it was Charles's life and his choice, but something about her felt predatory. Perhaps that was the right word, or perhaps she was overthinking. One thing was certain. The girl had magic that she didn't understand. Her parents had not taught her how to use it, but it was magic that sparkled and crackled in conflict with Cassandra's own. And that was never a good thing in Cassandra's hidden world. Of course, Amanda wouldn't know what that feeling was. She would only know the discomfort, but eventually, that discomfort might morph into something more tangible. And while Cassandra and Charles were close, they were not as close as aunt and nephew could be. If Charles were forced to choose between Amanda or her, he would pick Amanda, as was his right and as he should. The problem was that Cassandra would not let such a choice stand, which she knew would cause even bigger issues. So to prevent anything that she would regret, to prevent hurting her great-nephew and leaving her great-great-nephew without a mother, she kept her distance from Amanda as best as she could, like today. I'm surprised you came by, Charles said, offering her water. Cassandra raised her hand, a silent refusal, and moved into the kitchen, reaching into the refrigerator to pull out a bottle of white wine. She scanned it and frowned, a frown she wasn't sure that Charles saw. It was no-name brand, nothing to be proud of, especially considering their French heritage. But Charles was as American as they came. The French lineage that she and her brother were so proud of had been diluted through the generations. Charles didn't even know French. He didn't have a French passport or reminder. She thought of something she needed to change. Surprise visit, she said. But they both knew what that meant. Charles was smart enough, cunning enough, witty enough that's a bit of magic he understood. It was ironic, really, considering the situation. Amanda had magic, but she knew nothing of it, and Charles had none and knew more than most people did. He knew enough to know that his aunt's business endeavors, her successes, and even her immortality came from magic, and he knew that it had its hooks dug into her flesh and heart, bleeding her dry constantly, without mercy, without remorse, without release. When she had explained to him what she was doing and why, she could tell that he didn't fully understand it, and she didn't expect him to. But he never questioned it. He never tried to change her, never tried to make her see the world in its brightness, in beautiful colors. It would have been a waste, anyway. Many men over the years had told her that she was worth more than this vendetta. If anything, Charles tried to help, like he did now in his own, silent way. It was adorable how he was balancing his own wants with her needs, but the way that he stared was irritating. You can ask it, she said, sipping the wine slowly. It was too sweet, too sharp, but for now, it would do. This has something to do with those paintings you're looking for, doesn't it? He asked quietly, as if his son would hear their words and understand. That's why you're here. She shook her head. No, not at all. I truly did come to visit, but where I was before did, she said. Charles nodded, sipping his own water slowly. Did you find it? Cassandra nodded again. It was in Osaka, like I thought it was. Were you able to destroy it, like you wanted? Cassandra shifted, leaning against the silver refrigerator, her eyes flicking. Outside, it was a beautiful day, completely bright cerulean skies with puffy, white clouds, a perfect day, a day that normally she would have spent in her past in the courtyard of her convent, but instead, She was hearing a future that glowed with electricity in a world where power didn't come from magic or faith, but from technology and capitalism. She supposed, in some ways, the world wasn't that different now, only in the manner in which power was distributed. No, and that was that, a problem for the future. Do you have any idea where the next one is? Charles asked. I can. Always ask my college roommate again if you want, the one who works for the NSA. He helped you before. I know where the next one is, and it's not one I'm going to be able to get. Charles was puzzled. You are turning one down? He asked. I've never known you to do that. You've at least always tried. Cassandra flashed him a smile, walking to her great-great-nephew, picking him up, and kissing his cheek. That's true, she said, speaking in a high-pitched tone as she looked at the child, a bright smile on his face, one that she couldn't help but match. But this next one is going to kill them all. Physically, emotionally. And once it does that, I will swoop in and pick through their carcasses for the remains, she gleefully said, her voice an octave higher than it needed to be. She placed the baby on her hip, resting him comfortably against her body. Now, shall we go out to lunch? It's on me, of course. I want to hear everything about my sweet great-great-nephew.